Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I call this public hearing of the NCUA Board to order. I want to note for the record that due to the COVID-19 pandemic, today's hearing is open to the public through a live webcast only. The public may access the hearing by visiting the agency's homepage at www.ncua.gov and clicking on the provided webcast link. Additionally, presenters in today's webcast hearing are participating remotely, so if we experience any technical difficulties, I ask for your patience. Finally, I want to extend my gratitude to two NCUA staff members who have made this virtual format successful: Board Secretary Melaine Conyers-Osbrooks and Lead Information Technology Specialist Jesse Hyun. On behalf of my fellow board members, thank you both for your hard work over the last few days. This afternoon, we are meeting to hold a public briefing on the proposed NCUA budget. After opening statements by the board members, the 2022 through 2023 budget will be presented by Chief Financial Officer Eugene Sheed. Following Eugene's presentation, we will have a four-person panel of stakeholders offering their comments on the proposed budget. Each panelist will have up to 15 minutes to present. I ask that each of you respect the time limit. Also, the written comments you've submitted will be included as part of the record. Now let's turn to opening statements. As we begin today's hearing, I want to thank Eugene Sheed and the entire team in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer, as well as the Office of the Executive Director, for their diligent efforts in preparing the NCUA staff draft budget for 2022 and 2023. And I am also very appreciative of my fellow board members' willingness to engage with me on their priorities. While considerable work went into crafting the staff draft budget, this document is only a starting point for board discussions and not a final product. That is why it is important for the NCUA board to receive stakeholder input from today's witnesses, as well as through written comments. As a reminder, those written comments are due by tomorrow, Thursday, December 9th. I encourage everyone with an interest in maintaining a safe and sound credit union system with strong consumer protections to weigh in. As I have often said, a budget is a forward-looking document that establishes priorities. My budget priorities have always included appropriate resources for an effective cybersecurity program, a strong consumer financial protection and fair lending program, sufficient small credit union support, and ample resources for an effective examination and supervision program. And 21 months into the COVID-19 pandemic, the NCUA remains focused on keeping its employees and contractors safe so that we can continue to perform mission essential functions. We also have pragmatically and expeditiously addressed the economic fallout within the credit union system by providing appropriate regulatory flexibility, and we will continue to do so. Credit union members are counting on us to get it right, as are the taxpayers who back the Share Insurance Fund. On cybersecurity, I remain deeply focused on the risks that attacks pose to our financial system. As has been noted at previous board meetings, the COVID-19 pandemic has increased cybersecurity exposures for all, including federally insured credit unions and the NCUA. To that end, the NCUA is committed to maintaining the resilience and readiness of the credit union system in responding to evolving cybersecurity risks. We will continue to mature and strengthen our cybersecurity program as well. And we have known for decades that NCUA has maintained too light of a touch overseeing consumer financial protection and fair lending issues. There is a real need for us to improve our commitment in this area. For example, we conducted just 30 fair lending exams each year. That accounts for less than 1% of credit unions. Yet we have identified tens of thousands of credit union members who have been subjected to unfair practices in the last year alone. I remain deeply committed to strengthening the NCUA consumer compliance and fair lending programs to ensure that all consumers receive the same level of protection, regardless of their financial provider of choice. Additionally, small, low-income, and minority credit unions are vital to the continued health of the credit union system and are often the only providers of safe, fair, and affordable financial services in communities of color, underserved areas, and rural communities. Yet these credit unions are challenged by their lack of adequate resources. The pandemic has only exacerbated the situation. The NCUA can do its part by supporting these credit unions through grants, loans, training, and greater technical assistance. Finally, we must remain vigilant when it comes to safety and soundness. With the expiration of pandemic relief programs, more households will come under financial stress in the next year. And that stress can lead to credit defaults at credit unions. To best protect the system and the Share Insurance Fund, we ought to maintain at least the current exam program, which allows for extended exams at well-run credit unions with less than $1 billion in assets. In conclusion, when considering this budget, I am committed to doing what is right for the credit union members, the agency and its employees, the Share Insurance Fund, and the credit union system itself. I know that if we take the time to work together, we can identify a mutually agreeable budget that addresses everyone's shared priorities. In fact, there is already a fair amount of common ground amongst the board offices, and I look forward to working with my fellow board members and their staff to produce a consensus budget for the year ahead. That concludes my opening remarks. Vice Chairman Hauptman, you are now recognized.
Thank you, sir. I want to thank Eugene and Office of CFO for putting this together. I want to add on to Chairman's remarks about putting together the virtual hearing today to Melaine and
Vice Chairman Hauptman, you might want to turn on your video.
Man, look at us. You went a minute without audio and I spoke without video, man. Ridiculous. But anyway, even though I had the audio on, let me start over and just say, anyway, thanks to the folks, Office and CFO, and for Melaine and Jesse for putting this together. I know we're using a different system we don't normally do. And the only problems I think we're going to have are probably pilot error by us and not you guys. Also want to thank the organizations who have representatives today for their time doing this. I know they have other things to do to serve people they work with, but I think it's crucial that there is some voice for the people whose money we are spending. We know 100% of it belongs to credit union members, and we're in an unusual situation where we get to decide how much of their money we're going to take. Anytime one party decides how much of the other party's money they're going to take, we can probably guess which of those two thinks the money's a reasonable amount and the one of them that thinks maybe it's a bit much. I think that's just human nature. Again, this only occurs when there are no market constraints on it. I'd like to talk for a second about the most important area of our budget, which is staffing, right? We are an organization where our assets are the ones that go up and down the elevator every day. It's the people here, okay? The proposed budget of 48 new full-time employees, I don't think it's justified, given the positive performance of credit unions this last quarter. I'm aware that life will not always have the delinquency rates, et cetera, that we do now, but I don't know how high the correlation is between the number of bodies we have on payroll and the performance of the Share Insurance Fund and of credit unions. So shares and deposits went up by 220 billion, 14.4%, to $1.75 trillion. And despite this growth, the system's net worth went up by about 11%. So the aggregate net worth ratio, net worth as a percentage of assets, stood at 10.23%. So let me add a few more things, sorry. The membership grew by 4.9 million, right? So that gives about 3% overall. So what I'm trying to do here is compare what we're spending, what we have spent, and what we're planning on spending to the spending of the people whose money we're taking. We're now below 5,000 credit unions. 20 years ago, it was over 10 grand. I think it used to be 15 at its high. And over the same period, NCUA staff has gone up substantially. I'm concerned about today's budget and about future budgets, the proposed budget. These are positions that generally never go away. That's how government works. If you look at our spending and our head count, it generally goes up, even though the number of credit unions goes down. The all-in cost of an NCUA field examiner is roughly 138 grand a year. That's with benefits and everything else. That translates to 6.6 million annually for 48 new hires. So 66 million over 10 years, and that's flatline. I think we all know if you throw in inflation and raises, et cetera, we're probably looking at closer to 90 million. So if we're going to take, call it 90 million out of the pockets of credit unions over the next 10 years, the return on that investment must be certain, and it must be very, very high. We should be getting, credit unions should be getting a substantial return on that 66 to 90 million dollars. Thus far, I haven't seen anything that would warrant that kind of expansion. Now, I'm not naive enough to think there won't be challenges as we emerge from the pandemic. Like I said, today's low delinquency rates will not stay. That there will be a rainy day in the future, I'm very aware, and there'll be short-term problems that require immediate attention. But my perspective on the budget reflects a conviction that we deploy resources where they will do the most good, and I believe that is with our existing field staff. No offense to my colleagues in our home office, but the people closest to the exigent risks in credit unions are best equipped to address them quickly and effectively. Since we haven't been on site in over 20 months, there'll probably be a greater percentage of issues requiring fast action by seasoned examiners. That said, I think there's definitely a place for virtual exams in the future. We should give our field staff the latitude and resources to address these issues quickly, including allocating additional hours for small credit union support. I support the allocation of resources for greater financial inclusion, but ask that any new positions in this area be evaluated for permanent status only after we've consistently seen measurable goals achieved. This is the way it would work at a credit union. And I don't think we should have a more lax attitude towards spending money than that of the people who took it from us. So again, I want to mention that the point here is the seasoned examiners already on staff may be best equipped to deal with these issues as they come up. And finally, I support Board Members Hood call from last February to return excess funds in the operating budget back to credit unions. The buildup of cash and net balance and reserves in the operating fund is money raised by NCUA's operating fee on credit unions. This annual fee is intended to pay the agency's annual expenses. It wasn't intended to build reserves. Over the past 22 years, the funds, the reserves and the cash balance have increased dramatically. This has resulted in a year-end cash balance of roughly 96% as a percent of the operating expense. 20 years ago, it was 22%. There's some valid points made about the size and complexity of the agency's operating budget. I have not seen a demonstrated need for this level of excess funds in the operating fund. This is not our money, and having this much excess could lead to lax management of the budget within operating and capital budget limits established by the board. I appreciate and encourage the effort to conserve budget dollars, but some portion of the excess should be evaluated for return to credit unions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no further comments.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Hauptman. Board Member Hood, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I begin my remarks, I'd also like to thank so many folks who played a part in bringing today's draft budget before us. I'd like to thank Eugene Sheed for your hard work, Larry Fazio in the Office of the Executive Director, and also Melaine Osbrooks for her work in bringing this before the board today. And we would not be able to do any of this without our folks from OCIO. So Jesse, we certainly do want to thank you as well. As I've stated at the last board meeting, the proposed budget adds nearly 50 new employees for the 2022-2023 year, which matches the yearly staffing increase we saw as an agency during the Great Recession nearly a decade ago. I do not think or believe that we need nearly 50 new staffers at the agency. So this budget is not something that I can support in its current form. Additionally, I also do not see how I can support a budget that does not return money from the operating fund back to credit unions in a significant way, something I first called for earlier this year. My preference is indeed to cut the NCUA's budget year over year, something that should not be difficult to do since we have so much money remaining in the current budget. After all, as I've stated on many occasions, the NCUA is funded by the credit unions we regulate, and we must be responsible and faithful stewards of this money. When I last served on the board, the NCUA regulated just over 7,500 credit unions. Recently, we reported through the third quarter call report data that the credit unions we oversee today is far less than that. It's 5,000. And while the number of credit unions we regulate has fallen since I was last on the board, the NCUA budget has exponentially increased since that time. Now, I recognize, as the vice chairman alluded to earlier, yes, we've seen an uptick in credit union shares and deposits by the tune of about $219 billion third quarter this year over third quarter last year. We've also seen an uptick in the assets as well, with assets now approximating $2 trillion. Now, I don't really know if there is a correlation between the uptick in assets and the need for additional staffing of 50 levels. So that's something that I certainly want to hear more about. I do believe, though, that credit unions know how to best serve their member owners, and we need to create the regulatory environment to allow credit unions to succeed. Our budget should do just that. And the one before us today does not, and is not something, again, that I can support in its current form. I will also close by saying how disappointed I am on the timing of this year's budget. The budget before us is essentially a non-starter, and I think a lot of people recognize that. However, since our back is against the wall in terms of timing, the board is engaged in conversations about what the final budget would look like before today without meaningfully considering the comments from others, since the time frame we're operating under doesn't really allow us to do so thoroughly and in a robust manner. I must say that that is wrong, and I hope that it is not to be repeated. But again, I will conclude by also saying thank you to our presenters today. Credit unions are little d, democratically controlled cooperatives. And I certainly am glad that we are allowing democracy in action today by hearing from our stakeholders regarding our use of the credit union funds. It's my duty, it's my responsibility, I think, for us as a whole board to be faithful stewards of those resources, especially since we're looking at a budget of nearly $345 million. So thank you to our presenters. I look forward to hearing your remarks. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Hood. I will now ask the Chief Financial Officer, Eugene Sheed, to present the proposed budget. Eugene, you may start at any time.
Good afternoon, Chairman Harper, Vice Chairman Hoffman, and Board Member Hood. I'm Eugene Sheed, and I am the Chief Financial Officer of the National Credit Union Administration, here to provide an overview of the staff draft NCUA 2022-2023 budget. I would like to thank the stakeholders and members of the public for joining us this afternoon in showing their interest in this proposed budget. We have a slide presentation that will accompany my remarks, and we'll start with slide 1. The staff draft budget is posted to our website on November 17th and published in the Federal Register on November 24th. The public comment period, as the chairman noted, is open until December 9th. This process is conducted in accordance with NCUA's obligations under 12 USC Section 1789B. We continue to believe the NCUA is unique among federal financial regulatory agencies for the degree of transparency and the opportunity for comment that are a part of our budget process. Slide 2. This outlines the items I plan to cover in this briefing. During my comments, I will occasionally reference sections or page numbers in the staff draft budget document. Any page number or reference are to the staff draft budget document posted on our website. This is where you can find further detail beyond what I am including in my remarks this afternoon. I will open my presentation with a high-level overview of the budget proposal. I will then discuss some of the trends, context, and themes that pertain to the considerations that played into the development of this budget proposal. I will then provide highlights of each of the 3 budgets that the board approves each year: the operating budget, the capital budget, and the Share Insurance Fund administrative budget. Finally, I will discuss the financing mechanisms for the agency budget. Slide 3. The staff draft budget proposed for 2022 consists of $345.3 million in new budget resources, which would be an increase of 1.2% over the budget resources approved by the board for 2021. The operating budget request is for $326 million, an increase of 3.6%. The capital budget request is $13.1 million. It decreases by 30.7%. And the Share Insurance Fund administrative budget request is $6.2 million. It's a decrease of 21.7%. In addition, the draft budget proposal assumes the use in 2022 of unspent 2021 budget estimated to be $23 million. This is similar to how staff drafted the 2021 budget. Comparing the 2022 budget, including the carryover, to the board-approved 2021 budget that was included carryover from last year, the comparable year-over-year increase across the three budgets would be 5.8%. Slide 4. The next two slides present summary level view of NCUA's budget trends and staffing. Slide 4 shows the total 2021 budget in the 2022 proposal as compared with the NCUA's budget levels since 2010. The stacked bar shows the three board-approved budgets since 2010 and the proposal for 2022. This excludes the use of carryover resources approved by the board in any given year. The line chart shows the approved FTE staffing level since 2010, which has fluctuated within a close margin and which would increase in the proposed 2022 budget. Slide 5. This slide compares the relative size of the NCUA's budget to the federal banking regulators' budgets expressed as a share of the total system assets. The calculation divides the budget in millions of dollars by the prior year credit union system and banking system end-of-year assets respectively. It is notable that the NCUA's budget as a share of federally insured credit union assets is continuing to decrease and remains below the equivalent rate for the federal banking system. These trends demonstrate, I believe, NCUA's continued operational efficiency compared both to the size of the credit union system and to the operations of the federal banking regulators and insurers. Additional information on these subjects that I just discussed can be found in the staff draft budget on pages 1 through 8. Slide 6. Slide 6 shows the draft strategic goals proposed as part of the agency's draft 2022 to 2026 strategic plan. The board approved the release of the draft NCUA strategic plan 2022 to 2026 at its November board meeting last month. The draft budget was developed to support the draft strategic plan. The strategic plan is a framework that sets the agency's direction and guides resource requests, ensuring that the agency's resources and workforce are allocated and aligned to agency priorities and initiatives. The NCUA's budget and the NCUA's annual performance plans provide a more detailed annual look into the specific plans and approaches that the NCUA will employ in furtherance of the strategic goals, including how we plan to budget for our programs. The NCUA also uses risk management on multiple levels to inform and guide the execution of its strategies. The draft strategic plan is out for comment and can be found on our website, and a notice requesting public comment was also published in the Federal Register on November 24th, 2021. The public comment period for the draft strategic plan closes on January 24th, 2022. Slide 7. Pages 20 through 24 of the draft budget document provide a detailed review of the economic outlook provided by NCUA's Office of the Chief Economist and other key risk factors and trends that may impact the credit union system. Slide 7 provides a list of the several key issues discussed in the draft budget document The economic outlook and risk factors and trends play into how the NCUA foresees potential upcoming challenges and risks as we consider the development of a staff draft budget. Many of these themes are reflected in specific staffing proposals that I will discuss throughout this presentation. I have noted in my recent briefings to the NCUA board regarding the position of the Share Insurance Fund that the fund in aggregate and industry performance, as measured by the CAMEL rating system, remains strong. Credit union membership, assets, insured shares, and net worth have all increased during the past year, as the Vice Chairman has just commented on. However, the pandemic's potential impacts to the economy persist, and inflation has emerged as an issue. Other risk factors identified in this outlook section include the ongoing risk of poor cybersecurity, such as ransomware and malware attacks, the competitive challenges and opportunities posed by fintech and digital currency, concern regarding the increased opportunity for fraud due to challenges posed by the COVID pandemic, challenges faced by smaller credit unions in industry consolidation, and the climate-related financial risk as described in the Financial Stability Oversight Council's recent October report. Slide 8. Pages 26 through 28 of the draft budget document online describe some of the key themes reflected in our planning for the 2022 to 2023 draft budget. The COVID pandemic remains a consideration for the agency's priority and budgets for 2022 and 2023. The budget assumes a gradual resumption of on-site work and examinations during 2022. Merit was fully deployed in 2021, and the NCUA trained all applicable NCUA staff, SSAs, credit union users on this new application. In 2022, the NCUA will continue to make improvements as the system becomes more widely used. Priorities for the NCUA's 2022 examinations program include information security, payment systems, credit risk, allowance for loan and lease losses, Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering compliance, internal controls, and consumer protections. The draft budget includes resources to increase the NCUA's cadre of highly trained specialist examiners and to expand the requirements for the annual examination cycle to certain credit unions that have previously been on the extended cycle. The NCUA's approach to agency cybersecurity is founded on the National Institute of Standards and Technology's cybersecurity framework, which guides and constrains how network boundaries, mobile and fixed endpoints, such as phones and computers, and data are provisioned, managed, and protected. The framework's requirements are reinforced by Executive Order 14208, improving the nation's cybersecurity. The draft budget bolsters the NCUA's to-date cybersecurity efforts and enables the agency to align efforts with the requirements in the executive order. At its heart, financial inclusion means expanding access to safe and affordable financial services for underbanked and underserved people and communities. The NCUA's Access Initiative, Advancing Communities Through Credit, Education, Stability, and Support, began by reviewing NCUA regulations, processes, and procedures to expand opportunity for greater access to savings, credit, and other financial services provided by credit unions. The 5 initial access focus areas are chartering new credit unions, field of membership, low income designation, minority depository institution preservation, and consumer engagement and outreach. For 2022, the NCUA's Access Initiative would build on the work done in 2021. The agency plans to actively engage with credit union industry leaders and stakeholders to identify additional ways to help new, small, low-income designated and MDI credit unions to grow and prosper. Small credit unions with less than $100 million in assets are in a unique position to improve financial inclusion by offering their communities access to credit and other services. The draft budget proposes new staff and resources for the NCUA to improve the support provided to small credit unions. The NCUA uses examinations, supervision contacts, and data analysis to ensure credit unions comply with fair lending laws and regulations. The draft budget proposes a staffing resource enhancement to the NCUA's Fair Lending Program and increases in fair lending examinations by 50% and fair lending supervision contacts by 25%. The NCUA has undertaken a series of regulatory improvements in recent years and will continue to update and improve regulations and maintain a modern and effective regulatory framework. The NCUA's website includes additional detailed information about all proposed and final rules for the past several years. The NCUA's annual report includes results of regulatory reviews that the agency completes on a yearly basis. The NCUA's current performance target for regulatory reviews is to review 1/3 of the agency's regulations on an annual basis. Slide 9. The presentation will now shift to an overview of the operating budget proposal for 2022. The new budgetary resources included in the staff draft of the operating budget is $326 million, which would support the requested staffing level of 1,242 staff. The pie chart shows our standard budget categories to highlight how the resources would be allocated. Slide 10. This is a tabular depiction of the 2022 budget proposal organized by our budget categories. The note on slide 10 addresses how the staff draft budget proposes to use the $23 million projected year-end 2021 surplus by applying it to the planned contractual services budget for 2022. This makes the contractual services budget request for new budget authority lower than it otherwise would be. Slide 11. The proposed budget for employee compensation increases by $16.7 million or 6.9%. Employee compensation comprises 79% of the 2022 request for the operating budget. Merit and locality pay for current workforce is paid in accordance with our collective bargaining agreement. Employee salaries are estimated to increase 3.6%. Benefits costs are projected to increase overall by 8.4%. This increase is driven largely by the mandatory retirement contribution paid by NCUA as the employer to the Office of Personnel Management. The change in required retirement contributions to OPM comprises 21% of the growth in salaries and benefits. The 2022 cost impact for the 48 additional staff proposed in this budget accounts for $4 million of the compensation increase. Slide 12. Slides 12, 13, and 14 will present the specific additions to the NCUA workforce that are included in the draft budget. I don't plan to cover every single staffing change in detail, and many I've already referenced in my remarks. Pages 29 through 35 of the online draft budget document provide additional information on the proposed staffing changes. Slide 12 addresses two significant changes proposed for the field staff examinations and supervision program. I previously noted the NCUA is concerned with the ongoing economic impacts and potential COVID pandemic fallout, and the fact that the off-site examinations program has been conducted off-site for the past 21 months. The proposal would expand the requirement for annual examinations to include: 1, credit unions with assets between $500 million and $1 billion that have otherwise previously qualified for an extended examination cycle based on the current Exam Flexibility Initiative criteria. And 2nd, credit unions with assets more than $250 million and evaluated as facing high risk of business or economic challenges. The expansion of the annual examinations requirement would necessitate increasing the exams workforce by 29 FTE. The other staffing change featured on slide 12 is to create 23 regional specialist examiners. 3 disciplines in particular are needed: regional electronic payment specialists, regional information system officers, and regional lending specialists. Specialist examiners contribute to conducting examination and supervision work, but at a lower overall output level than examiners. Therefore, the repurposing of these examiner positions and converting them to specialists would necessitate a net increase of 3 examiner FTE. Slide 13. Slide 13 displays additional changes I have previously referenced. 2 additional staff are proposed to assist with the needs of small credit unions, while 4 staff would augment the fair lending function by increasing fair lending exams and fair lending supervision contacts. An additional position on this page, the financial inclusion and outreach staff, would be responsible for developing, coordinating, and implementing the NCUA's strategic stakeholder relationship related to community affairs, economic inclusion, financial education, and literacy activities. Slide 14. Slide 14 outlines the number of additional staff changes, mostly at headquarters, as well as the creation of a separate position of AMAC president that would be distinct from the Southern Regional Director to provide dedicated leadership over AMAC operations and avoid potential conflicts in the current structure. Finally, on slide 14, with the wind down of the NGN activities in 2022, dedicated staff would be moved to other vacancies within the agency and their former positions would be eliminated. Slide 15. The agency travel expenses have been sharply curtailed due to the pandemic-related travel restrictions and are the majority of the $23 million that is available for carryover to offset the 2022 budget. While the NCUA employees are still in a mandatory off-site exams posture, a very small level travel still occurs periodically as urgent circumstances may warrant, consistent with our mission needs. The proposed travel funding for 2022 is $20.8 million, which anticipates a return to travel during the upcoming year. For context, the pre-pandemic board-approved travel budget approved for 2020 was $27.4 million, or 32% greater than the 2022 request. This lower level reflects both the fact that we're anticipating a gradual return during the upcoming year, as well as an assumption that through lessons learned and the virtual exams program, relatively less travel will be needed in the future. Slide 16 provides an overview of the draft budget for contracted services by category, with the predominant wedge of the pie graph dedicated to information technology operations and maintenance. As I previously noted, the $23 million in projected availability that will be unused at the end of 2021 would be applied to offset the contracted services budget for 2022. Factoring in this additional spending from the carryover surplus for contracts in 2022, the contracted services item would actually show an increase of about 24%. However, some of the increase is accounted for by the merit system going into production. As I will later describe in the capital budget, it decreases by almost 31%. Operating costs for merit moved from capital, while it was under development, to the operating budget in 2022. Slide 17 provides some additional description of the contracted services budget in several subcategories to provide greater insight into the composition of this expense category. This slide shows the wide range of support that the NCUA purchases with contract services, everything from critical information technology support and security to accounting, procurement, payroll, and human service systems that are largely acquired through cross-servicing with other federal agencies, to other contract costs for facilities, security, training, and audit services and support. The draft budget document on pages 40 through 44 provide more detailed discussion on the contracted services budget. Turning now to the capital budget, slide 18, we see the NCUA's capital budget proposal. The NCUA uses a rigorous process to identify investment needs for information technology, facilities improvement and repair, and other multi-year capital investments. The capital budget includes funds for software development projects, hardware replacement upgrades, and other information technology systems costs, such as security upgrades to defend against cyber threats. The agency uses its Information Technology Priority Council to review and make recommendations on IT development projects. The overall capital budget decreases by $5.8 million as compared to 2021, or by nearly 31%. This is in addition to a 25% decline that occurred between 2020 and 2021. The most significant change to the capital budget is the deployment of the merit system, which again moves partially over to the operating budget for ongoing maintenance. The most significant project proposed in the 2022 capital budget is for the update of the agency's laptop computers, which are at the end of their useful life and need to be replaced. This is proposed to occur in 2022. Appendix B of the draft budget document online provides a detailed project-by-project description of each of the capital line items shown on this slide. Slide 19. Slide 19 is an overview of the Share Insurance Fund administrative budget. This budget pays for all direct costs of the Share Insurance Fund administration and management, including the support of the NCOA's Guaranteed Notes program. For 2022, this budget would decrease by $1.7 million, or nearly 22%. The main driver of this decrease is the wind down of the NGN program. The last NGN matured earlier in 2021. Overall, the program still has assets to manage and sell and further distributions to make. This activity should be substantially completed during 2022 and staff reassigned to other vacancies in the agency. Slide 20 shows the category level detail of the Share Insurance Fund administrative budget. Consistent with my comments, the largest reduction is to the NGN program. Also, travel expenses related to state examiner training are reduced in light of the training plan for 2022 and in consideration of the ongoing pandemic efforts, partially lasting into 2022. I'll now switch to financing on slide 21. Slide 21 depicts the way the NCOA finances its operations, consistent with the Federal Credit Union Act. The majority of the operating budget is derived from two sources: the operating fee paid by federally chartered credit unions and the overhead transfer rate that is drawn from the Share Insurance Fund. The methodology for computing both of these were put out for public comment in 2021, with refinements to the operating fee methodology approved by the board at its December 2021 meeting. Pages 52 through 59 of the published draft budget provide a detailed review of the NCOA's budget financing. The table and the pie chart on this slide illustrate the portion of the NCOA budget paid by federal credit unions and federally insured credit unions. In percentage terms, we estimate that the federal credit unions would cover 68.3% of the 2022 budget, while the federally insured state credit unions would pay for 31.7%. Slide 22. As already discussed, the draft budget proposal estimates $23 million in surplus funds that were provided by the board in 2021 for NCOA operations. Factoring in the use of the operating surplus into the year-over-year comparison, the 2022 draft budget is 5.8% higher than compared to 2021. The 2021 budget surplus is largely the result of ongoing COVID-related travel restrictions, as well as some surplus in compensation and contracts. In the 2022 staff draft budget, the $23 million surplus is credited to offset the proposed contracted services budget. Slide 23. During the past year, questions have been received, and as already noted, Mr. Hood has made comments at the public board meeting regarding the amount of year-end cash and cash equivalents held by the operating fund. Slide 23 provides an analysis of the cash and cash equivalents of the operating fund as of September 30th, 2021. The vast majority of these resources are needed to either pay for unpaid obligations, both goods and services already received, as well as those under contractual obligation by the agency but not yet received or performed, and cash needed for purposes already approved by the board, such as the payroll for the remainder of the year and projects that have not yet been awarded contracts. This later category also includes the operating fund cash that is related to the $23 million in operating budget surplus that I've described. Slide 24. As I just noted, the majority of the available cash, now $119.8 million, is needed to pay for outstanding invoices, contractual agreements, or other expenses already made by the NCUA and for budget already approved by the NCUA board but not yet obligated. This does leave $40.4 million in cash in excess of current approved budgetary needs. However, the NCUA has an operational need to consider in evaluating these resources. Because the operating fee is not collected until April, the operating fund should retain a reserve to meet first quarter cash needs, which I estimate to be about $25.3 million. I would also note the NCUA has unbudgeted future operating fund accrued liabilities, which as of September 30th are estimated to be $29.5 million, mostly for accrued employee leave. These unbudgeted liabilities are unlikely to become a significant actual cash expense in a particular year, but are a consideration for how much cash in the operating fund should be retained. Page 25. Page 25 and 26 provide an overview of the 2023 budget. Slide 25 provides a budget category overview of the changes from 2022 to 2023, similar to that shown on slide 10 for the changes from 2021 to 2022. Slide 26, the operating budget would increase in 2023 for three primary reasons. One, the contracted services budget would increase because the $23 million in proposed surplus anticipated to offset 2022 would no longer be available. The travel budget is anticipated to increase as we continue to unwind from pandemic-related travel restrictions and resume on-site examinations and work. And employee salaries and benefits would increase because of the staffing growth in 2022, as well as 8 additional positions proposed for 2023, as well as implementation of pay adjustments, again, relative to the collective bargaining agreement. Comparing 2023 to 2022 with the use of the one-time, factoring the use of the one-time $23 million, another way to look at the growth between 23 and 22 is that it would increase by 5.7%. Slide 27. Budget background slide shows an example of how the NCUA's budget, including the CLF and the Community Development Revolving Loan Fund, are incorporated into the President's budget. Additional information can be found at the website on that page. In slide 28, this final slide contains the link to both the draft budget document that I have been discussing and provides a link to where comments can be submitted. Thank you for your time today. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my remarks on the proposed staff draft budget for 2022 and 2023. Thank you.
Thank you again, Eugene, and thanks to your team. I know that you've spent a lot of time working to develop this budget. In written comments before today's hearing, several parties have raised concerns about the travel budget. They view it as unrealistic that we will return to on-site exams so quickly, and they contend that we should continue to learn from the lessons about virtual examinations that we've developed during the pandemic. I must admit, I see their points. After all, it seems unlikely that the agency will return to on-site work in much of the first quarter, given the likely increase in COVID-19 caseloads expected over the winter months. And we have also learned important lessons about how to conduct more of the exam virtually during the pandemic. Would you help us to understand how ACFO came up with the current travel budget estimate? And could there be room to decrease this estimate before finalizing the budget?
Yes, Chairman, I'd be happy to explain the assumptions behind that. So obviously the NCUA as an organization I think a lot of the employees as well are eager to get back to sort of doing their business, getting back on site to the credit unions and conducting some on-site examination work. So we do believe as you know, safety and health concerns allow to be rolling back to that. When we were putting together the budget over the fall, you know, when that can happen is a bit of a moving target. For the first quarter, we were assuming a gradual resumption up to as much as 60%. of what we've seen in previous travel. But as you said, given kind of where we're at today at the start of December, that might be a bit of an overestimation. For the remainder of the year, we are estimating travel to be approximately 85% of pre-pandemic levels. Again, partially learning, discounting from previous levels based on what we've learned in being in offsite posture and virtual exams. So I do think it's worthwhile to reassess that outlook as we work towards a final budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Eugene, and I look forward to working with you and your team on that. Another question raised in submitted statements before today's hearing is the decision to allocate the capital costs to the capital budget costs to the Share Insurance Fund. Would you walk us through why the agency decided to make that adjustment a couple of years ago? And does the agency actually allocate 100% of its computer acquisition and maintenance budget to the Share Insurance Fund?
Sure, I'd be glad to provide some clarity on that because I do think it's can be a bit of a technical discussion, and it is something that changed in the past year. So first, it's not 100%, but I will explain kind of what we do. The allocation of the portion of the budget to the Share Insurance Fund done through the OTR methodology. So while I think there may be some confusion around the changes to the operating fee methodology that were approved by the board last December and implemented as a part of the 2021 budget, the recent update to the operating fee methodology it ensures that the cost of new capital acquisitions will be borne equitably between the federal credit unions and the FSCUs at the time the budget is approved and the acquisitions are made. And so that was the key change. Both of them, the federal credit unions and the FSCUs still share the responsibility for the ultimate acquisition cost. But what had changed last year was that previously the FSCUs through the OTR reimbursed the operating fee based on the depreciation schedule that would carry out over many years. So the operating fund basically fronted the money, and then the OTR paid it back over time. Now, what changed last year is to make those contributions timing the same at the time the investments are incurred. So that I think hopefully that helps to clarify that. It was a change in the timing of the payment, but in terms of the ultimate payments made, that did not change, and it is also not 100%.
So just to go into just a little deeper, the 100% that we don't pay, charge state credit unions 100% coverage. What is it? Is it 65% more equivalent? I should say 35% more equivalent to what they pay through the OTR?
So it'll be based on the OTR rate, and it would apply to most systems investments that we make. But we also make sure that it's not a system that would not be a part of the insurance related portion of the budget. So it's going to be most, but it's going to be at the OTR rate, which typically is, for the last couple of years, have been around 61%.
Thank you, Eugene. I do have just one question for you. If we could turn to slide 24. As I look at this slide, it shows that of the $40 million in excess cash to meet budget needs, we still need at least $25 million to pay for expenses during the first few months of 2022 until we can collect the operating fee. So that leaves a surplus of about $15 million and not $40 million. Is my math correct? And how much would it be? What is the amount that would be prudent for us to hold on reserve for contingencies, such as you point out, the accrued employee leave?
Sure. So I would say your math is correct. The $40 million is the amount of excess cash in excess of budget needs approved by the board. The $25 million that is referenced is what we believe we need during the first several months of the year before the fee is collected. And I believe it would be prudent to reserve at least that much. That leaves you with 15 million. As noted, there are additional considerations to be aware of, such as the unbudgeted liabilities for items such as accrued employee leave. But these unbudgeted items are generally unlikely to materialize to a great extent in a given year. So I think reserving for certainly not all that amount, the risk of significant expense there is fairly low. The other thing I'd point out where we did see an increase a couple of years ago as a part of the NCUA's realignment, where employees were incentivized to leave, and there was a large spike in employee leave payout. The NCUA provided a specific budget at that time to cover that, so as not to require to go into these cash reserves. So to the extent it's a possible known event coming at us, the board is able to approve a budget for those contingencies.
Thank you again, Eugene. That concludes my questions. I now recognize Vice Chairman Hauptman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Eugene, for that. Very informative, and I really appreciate the slide deck. I think it was quite well done. The one thing I might have liked is some more backdated stuff. But let me give you this. The issues you said justify the budget increase. Cybersecurity, climate risks, consolidation, smaller credit unions, fair lending. Is it fair to say those will probably exist next year and the year after that?
I would say those tend to be long-term trends, yes.
So will we need another 50 people the year after next?
So the 50 people is largely driven by the change to the exams program. And if the change were to be approved, then we would need that staff and those work hours to complete the revised exam program. They would, as long as that policy stayed in place, that particular increase in staff would be needed, but it wouldn't be sort of another 50 and another 50.
What do you think when we sit here next year, what do you think it'll be?
So we have made a few adjustments proposed for the 2023 column of 8 additional positions. I think that would be a more reasonable estimate. And I think if you look at the last few years, the amount of staffing change from year to year has generally been single digits or low double digits.
I know you probably looked this up from last year, but the same way you have a guess on 2023 FTE, last year when you were guessing 2 years ahead, what did you think what was the 2021 expected employee change?
So to be candid, in a lot of years, we don't project a second year staffing change. We just assume status quo. We were trying to be a little more forward looking this year to anticipate potential needs in 2023. So we did include 8 additional staff.
But last year you didn't do the 2 years.
We did the 2 years last year, but there was no anticipated change.
Why did we go from no anticipated change to adding 48?
So I think again, the driver of it, the preponderance of it's going to be the proposed staffing change for the exams program. I mean, that's what really drives the change in the FTE, which wasn't discussed or contemplated last year, but came up as we were considering the anticipated risks and how to potentially respond to them as we go back on site.
So in 12 months, we went from a guess of 8. Listen, I know projecting even a year out, 2 years out is hard, but we went from 8 and then it wound up being close to 50. That's why I wonder about 2023 when we guess 8, we might wind up again, another plus 40. Let me go to this. In 2010, the operating budget was about 200 million. We're looking at 326 million for next year. What are credit union members getting for a 63% increase in our budget?
So I think that over a decade or so, there's going to be your sort of typical cost drivers of pay adjustments. I think that one of the biggest areas that's increased has certainly been in information technology. So cybersecurity, the whole technology infrastructure laydown, the investments of the merit program. I mean, I think all those things are contributing or what have contributed to the budget. I think some of those investments in technology, I would like to think, allow us the opportunity to be more efficient in staffing and how we project out our workload hours, such that, had we not made those investments in technology over the past decade, either there would have been more risk to the system, which has seen relatively good results over the past decade, and or the need for additional staffing levels beyond what we currently have in the budget.
So if we go forward another 12, I know that's super hard to predict. You think credit unions should expect to pony up another 60-something% and we'll be $500 million?
So I think there's going to be a lot of variables on that.
For sure.
I think we will become more information and technology savvy, and that will continue to be an increasing part of our budgetary needs as well as our work needs. And while I don't know that there's necessarily a one-to-one correlation, or I don't believe there is, between making investment technology and reducing staff, I think some of the opportunity for things like virtual exam, allow us to reduce travel spending and potentially continue to look at the overall staffing needs for the organization through the workload staffing budget.
Gotcha. If you were paying an organization and you got to weigh in on their budget, would you want to do it the day before it goes on the agenda for a vote?
No, I think the timing has already been noted as suboptimal for this year. I mean, I think that we continue a very good practice of having comment and providing this public forum. I do think the timing this year is not what it should have been.
So I think we agree. If it was our money and I was supposed to have a say in it, I might not want the day before they're going to put it to press. I know. Chairman Harper mentioned consumer protection issues. Fair enough. Fair lending, et cetera. So there's thousands of examples of credit union members who feel they were hard done by, and that was a rationale for adding expense and headcount. If we added those resources, those people, would they go away in a couple of years, say, if it turned out there were the same number of complaints about these things, and therefore we didn't see much effect from it?
So I think that would be something that would be subject to ongoing assessment. Is taking a look at what do you need as a baseline level to ensure there's adequate and effective compliance, versus what's the marginal return of adding to that, and what's the marginal return of problems that are found. I mean, as the chairman mentioned, it's a pretty small number, way less than 1% right now, of credit unions that are being covered in each year. I think the increases make sense, and just brings it up to really 1%. Whether that's a long-term need or, again, as the agency did a couple of years ago, we do periodically reassess what the programmatic priorities are for the organization, and can make reassessment or adjustment.
So if the problem that we would solve via more people and more money does not change, we would remove that solution of those people and that more money?
So I think that would be, it's a part of looking at the budgets. We do look at what are the workload drivers, including what are the results of work. And so that would be something that would be assessed, whether that would, whether there'd be other factors that necessitate or drive a recommendation to subsequently reduce them, I think, would be seen on what bears out.
Gotcha. Yeah, I just don't want us to fall in that trap of where you say, we look at every problem and say, you know what that needs? It needs some more money in my pocket. That's what would help. Remind you that billions upon billions have been spent, and thousands of public servants have retired with good pensions for taxi and limousine commissions, and those are there for the safety of the passengers. The unregulated rideshare market has considerably lower accident rates, death rates, theft rates, and criminal rates. So I just caution us to say, I think we should get more money in our checking accounts to solve their problem, and sometimes we think we need to disconnect that from our heads. Sometimes more of ourselves is not necessarily effective. That doesn't mean it's not a problem. It just doesn't mean that paying us more is necessarily the solution. Let me ask you one more thing. I got it right here. The 2023, you mentioned you did 2 years, and I fully understand the difficulty of projecting out. That's 17% more than today. Why do credit union members need to pay 17% more?
So again, I would say that there's a couple of distortion effects going on with kind of how you look at the budget. 2022, the proposed budget before the board is relatively, I would say, artificially lower than it would otherwise be because of the 23 million. That 23 million is a one-time asset. Presumably, we're trying to budget and taking another look at things like travel, as the chairman suggested. We're not trying to build a budget that's going to have a bunch of carryover in it at the end of the year. So in building 23, we're assuming that's not happening. And so that drives a significant part of that year-over-year 17%.
Sure, I wasn't asking about year over year. I know that that 23 million is throwing it off. I was talking about the 2-year total gap change.
Okay, the 2-year gap total change. So
yeah, I was doing that specifically to take that issue out.
Okay. So I think that, there was a similar but lesser effect that happened with the 2021 budget, which was also lower because of carryover the board approved from 19. So again, that's partially driving it. The other driver is going to be the staffing adjustment that's proposed. So the 50 additional FTE are going to become progressively more expensive. The other area that will be coming back because it was artificially low in 2021 as well as 22 would be travel. So those would be the three key drivers that are driving that change.
No, I hear you. I have a travel budget in my office and representation. I don't think I'm going to spend 10% of it this year. Okay, when we get to the private sector folks that are going to testify for us today, I asked a few of them earlier about their own organization's budgets, for comparison. Ms. Carrie Hunt is going to speak later, and I'm going to ask her this, and she emailed me a bit of an answer and said that they dropped headcount by 50% in the last 5 years. I mean, maybe they were overstaffed 5 years ago. I don't know. But they did more with less. Here it is. Redeployed resources, outsourced as necessary, and partnered to achieve savings to not have the sort of budget increases we had. That strikes me. Well, Eugene, does that strike you as sort of a normal private sector kind of answer?
Yeah, it does.
Do we make statements like that?
So I don't think we make statements that are quite like that. I think we do look, for ways to be efficient in what we deliver. But I don't think we're necessarily directly comparable to a private entity.
Why aren't we comparable? I agree with
Well, because I think we've got a statutory mandate on, to regulate and oversee and supervise the credit union system, which while its total number of institutions decline, assets continue to go up. And I think we've got a statutory responsibility to the Share Insurance Fund. And so I think those drive a base level of workload that is maybe less flexible than you'd see in a private sector entity.
Yeah, I would think they have pretty serious obligations to their members, or for that matter, if you're a league, to the credit unions. I think they have pretty serious obligations as well. Does being a monopoly service provider, that if you were a credit union or a hotel chain or something, and you overcharged for the level of service you provided, people would take your business elsewhere. And over time, someone who did that would have smaller and smaller budgets because they would have less revenue. Does being a monopoly service provider, you think, impact the graph of our total expenses?
So I think there is an inherent challenge in issue that has to be looked at as being essentially a monopoly. I mean, I think there are market distortions that happen with monopolies, to be sure. And I think one of the ways that we try and get at that is through processes like this with the public comment period. To, as you said, remind us of the situation, the views of the folks who, as you say, whose money we're spending.
Fair enough. That concludes my remarks. Back to the chairman.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vice Chairman. And one thing that, if you're interested in, I'd be interested certainly in working with you on this, is returning the agency to a zero-based budgeting program where in each year the budget every line item has to be justified, and we start at zero and we build up from that, not necessarily continue on. So
Yeah, that was an old Jimmy Carter idea too. Yeah, I agree.
there you go. Let's turn now to Board Member Hood.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, thank you, Eugene. Really robust presentation today. This budget proposes a significant number of new examiners. I know we've talked about that rather extensively, but I wanted to sort of get a feel from you in terms of how many examiner openings do we already have that we're trying to fill?
As of today, I believe we have 34 examiner vacancies in the NCUA.
And this would be in addition to the 50 that are proposed.
This would be in addition to those that are proposed, yes.
Very well. And any reason as to why those 34 have not been filled as of yet?
So I think there's kind of an ongoing turnover within the examinations ranks. I think there's probably some challenge with recruitment that I know a lot of agencies and employers face. But in talking with our Chief Human Capital Officer about the prospect of having to add significant additional examiners as a part of the workforce, in addition to the vacancies that exist, I think it's acknowledged that that would be a challenge, but something that, with planning and sort of diligent cooperation between the regional offices and the Chief Human Capital Officer's office would be something that, they would address if that's what got approved in this budget.
Great. It's just worth repeating, Eugene, that it's not just NCUA looking for new examiners. When I talk to any of the other FIREA agencies, they too are looking for a number of individuals, and it's very difficult finding them. So I just want to note that it may be easier said than done. You mentioned this earlier, and I want to go back to it. A few years ago, we actually did realign the 5 regions into 3. Where are the savings from the realignment? Where have those savings been recognized?
Sure. So I don't know if we're able to pull up slide number 4, but that showed the historic trend that includes the budget as well as the staffing. It's a little hard to see on this chart with the year-over-year comparisons, but whether you consider it as savings or future cost avoidance, I would say they have been realized over the past several years. The realignment plan streamlined the regions, as you noted, and reduced onboard staff and terminated a number of leases. And those were all real costs that the agency was incurring prior to the realignment. That plan also made investment in some key areas, so it wasn't just cuts. It was sort of a rebalancing of NCUA's efforts in many areas. So additional staff added to the General Counsel's office, our ONES program that oversees the largest credit unions, and it reorganized a number of other functions. So on slide 4, although it is awfully hard to see, the staffing between 2026 and 2019, the FTE fell. So we did decline in terms of staffing, so it's not always a one-way street. It was a reduction of 65 FTE that occurred during that period, attributable to the realignment efforts. Had the NCUA not undertaken the realignment and not consolidated the regions and closed the regional offices or make the headquarter changes, then the reduced staff and the leases that were along with it presumably would still be in our budget. And I'd estimate those costs and that cost avoidance, those actions, to be about the equivalent of $10 million a year, mostly for the reduced 65 FTE, but also the termination of the leases that was a part of that in Atlanta, Albany, and Alexandria. And that concludes my remark.
Great. Thank you, Eugene. I want to now focus on the overhead transfer rate. From 1985 into 2000, the OTR was roughly 50%. I actually think when I was last on the board, the OTR was about 53.8%. Today, we're proposing 62.3%. Now, I recognize that we've likely changed the methodology, but how can we justify such a large change in just over a decade, if that?
So the methodology has changed over the years. And I think in its earliest years, frankly, for a long time, it was at 50%, which frankly, I think was probably largely arbitrary. The current methodology was developed and sent out for public comment in 2017, and the board approved it in 2017. And last year, the methodology was again made available for public comment and was briefed to the board in December. Prior to the 2017 update, the rate was actually as high as 73.1%. And generally was hovering around the 70% in the couple of years prior to the 2017 update. That 2017 update set forth 4 principles in a 3 simplified step process, which I think helped improve transparency and was generally accepted and widely commented on during the 2017 comment period. It also had the effect of lowering the rate, although that wasn't what it was specifically intended to do. And so it went from as high as 73.1% down to a rate that's been in the low 60s, and I think has also been more predictable or more steady year over year. There were some years in which there were 10% swings in any given year. The rate the last couple of years has been within a fairly tight band in the low 60s. That concludes my answer.
Great. Thank you, Eugene. I just have 2 quick more questions. I want to now focus on the Office of the Chief Information Office. And again, I recognize it's because of their efforts that we're able to have today's discussion and to even have our panelists speak and for us to be able to see them. So I recognize the importance of their role. When I was last on the board, however, the OCIO budget was roughly $14 million. The proposed budget today has it at nearly $65 million. Now, I certainly understand technology needs are certainly more complex than they were the last time I was here on the board. So then how should we, as a board, monitor this growth, especially when IT and cybersecurity issues are so vast and so complex?
Good questions. And so as you note, the technology landscape has changed substantially over the past 10 or 15 years. So, I mean, a part of that comes with statutory requirements and standards issued by Congress, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, Department of Homeland Security, particularly in the area of cyber. I mean, among the changes, obviously, that you've seen in the past decade are the proliferation of iPhones, iPads, desktops, a more complex network, as well as one that needs to be made more robust, more business intelligence tools and analytics. The increase, obviously, Merit, replacing a core examination system that was over 20 years old. Improvements, I believe, we've made to the Consumer Assistance Center, hardware and software upgrades to handle inquiries from credit unions. I know in the past decade, we've implemented, going back about a decade, a new accounting system, and more recently, procurement systems and human resource systems that were antiquated, and in some cases, frankly, were requiring manual processing time. And, you know, so for example, in the office of the CFO, where apart from some reorganizations, the staffing has been flat for a number of years, I don't think that would have been possible without some of the investments made in information technology. And so on top of all of that, there's obviously the cybersecurity. I think the way that, you know, NCOA, I know the way that we do it at a staff level, and I think something, you know, that we could be more transparent with, perhaps with the board, is looking at some of the benchmarking that we do. So we do try and gauge ourselves against what other folks are doing, even though, as the vice chairman said, you know, we're in a monopoly position. There are other folks in similar industries and similar organizations that we can periodically compare ourselves to. Those comparisons aren't always highly precise because sometimes information between agencies, they don't want to share it so much, but we do have some rough order of magnitude and some estimates, and I think we fare comparably to that. And I think the other area to, you know, continue to talk about continues to be the, you know, interplay between technology and our technology investment in staff, in staff productivity. So I think those are ways as a board, I would suggest, and is sort of part of agency leadership, that I think we take a look at balancing, is this investment something that makes sense?
Well, of course, I don't want to be penny rich and pound foolish. So thank you for that response. And I recognize it's because of some of the investments that we've made in things such as Merit and even some of the technology that allowed us to pivot immediately with the onset of the pandemic. So again, I recognize its importance of the OCIO spend, but just want to make sure we're cognizant of the fact that it is credit unions' money. So I do hope that we can continue to use these funds wisely and judiciously. Eugene, going back to slide 24, and I think we've discussed that quite a bit regarding the upfund and the $40.4 million. I just want to go on the record as saying whatever that amount that we give back to credit unions, I'm agnostic, little a, when it comes to whether it's 10 million or 15 million for that matter. But the fact is, it would be helpful for our credit unions to have some of those excess funds given back to them so that they can use it to meet some of their needs, just as we are increasing our budget. Many of them may not have the luxury of being able to increase with the same degree of alacrity that we're doing. So smaller institutions, our MDIs, our LIQs, they all could benefit from whatever that amount could be for their credit union to use it for cyber, data protection. The list goes on. So while I, again, am going to hold out to see what that final figure is, my question for you is, do we have the systems in place to reimburse credit unions by check or electronic payment when we are able to disperse such funds under question?
So I would say that as a system for reimbursement, we do have systems. We are obviously conducting financial transactions with the credit unions on a consistent basis through the collection with the federal credit unions, the collection of the operating fund, and then with all the credit unions in terms of the capital deposit adjustments. And so we are able to receive funds and make distribution of funds. We've also done so obviously recently within the past several years of a dividend to the credit union. So from a systemic standpoint, we've done that business before. We do that business, and I think that's very much doable. What we haven't done specifically is to look at how we would, at least in recent years, how we would make some sort of a distribution or return of funds to the credit unions that pay the operating fee specifically. So we would have to probably talk with the board, I think, in the Office of General Counsel about the methodology for that so that we understand what we're doing and can be on the same page and explain it to folks. But if that were the board's direction, we could do that. The other approach that I think the agency has done in the past is to simply credit the upcoming fee paid in the fee schedule that we develop as a part of the budget so that folks send in less money. But if the board was interested in sending out money separate from that, we could certainly work to make that possible.
Well, I look forward to working with my fellow board members to come up with what's most appropriate and expedient, but at the same time, something that reduces the funds that our credit unions are having to rely upon, such that we can give it to them so that they can, again, use it to meet some of their day-to-day needs. You mentioned benchmarking, and again, I believe it's so important that we benchmark against our other regulatory peers. And I would just caution for those who are joining us and listening in that we at NCUA are a self-funded agency paid for by the credit union system. So while we may see other agencies in DC seeing upticks in their budget request and what they're hoping to have, that is largely because of Congress. So I want folks to know that we, again, are wanting to be better stewards because, again, it's credit unions funding. That concludes my questions and my time with you, Eugene. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Board Member Hood, and thank you again, Eugene, for your detailed presentation and answering all of our questions. That concludes our first panel. Our second panel consists of industry and state regulatory representatives. They include Mike Shank, Credit Union National Association, Ann Kosachev, National Association of Federally Insured Credit Unions, Lucy Ito, National Association of State Credit Union Supervisors, and Carrie Hunt, Virginia Credit Union League. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome. As a reminder, you each will have up to 15 minutes to present, and all comments and questions will be held until the end. We will begin with Mike, followed by Ann, who will then be followed by Lucy and then Carrie. Mike, please begin when you are ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. I'm Mike Shank, Chief Economist at CUNA, and I appreciate the opportunity to once again share CUNA's thoughts on the agency's budget process, as well as some general observations about the budget itself and the strategic direction reflected in the budget proposal. Before I do that, I'd like to take a moment to stress just how much we appreciate the numerous steps taken by NCUA under this board's leadership to implement policies during the COVID-19 pandemic that helped credit unions to more effectively work to improve their members' financial well-being and advance the communities that they serve. What you did had real impact. It got millions of average consumers toward the other side of the crisis as quickly and with as little disruption as possible. We're hopeful that the agency will remain responsive and open to the needs of credit unions and their members during this continuing global crisis. Getting back to the specific topic of the meeting, I'd like to commend the agency first and foremost for continuing to provide comprehensive budget information, as well as rationalization of the budget and agency expenditures in the context of a well-communicated strategic plan. Providing this information in advance, holding an open briefing like this, where stakeholders are invited to testify, and soliciting written comment is plain and simple good public policy. It certainly reflects the agency's unmistakable commitment to government transparency. I want to be clear, CUNA and our member credit unions recognize that NCUA is the only FREA agency that has embraced this level of transparency and engagement. We appreciate this distinction. We believe this process is incredibly important. Our members believe this process is incredibly important. As advocates, our ability to see these details and connections helps us better articulate to our member credit unions exactly what the agency is doing and why. Given their unique ownership structure, we agree that credit unions deserve to know how and where their members' money is being spent. They deserve to see the link between those expenditures and their mission of improving financial well-being for all. And they deserve to weigh in directly or indirectly when they perceive a significant disconnect in spending plans and priorities when compared to their core mission. The layout and organization of the documents you shared publicly are great, and they're consistent with those we've seen in the past. That's very helpful. Overall, the budget justification document is clear, comprehensive, and well-developed. Proposed activities and expenditures described generally align with strategic initiatives that the agency has previously detailed, and for the most part, these are initiatives that CUNA has analyzed, discussed, and broadly encourages and supports. The budget justification also appropriately responds to significant operational challenges and changing supervisory priorities arising from the ongoing COVID-19 crisis and its much anticipated aftermath. However, it's also important to note that the NCUA's new draft strategic plan differs from previous plans in important ways. Several strategic goals in particular are related and related objectives have changed, and that's pretty obvious in the document. A number of those changes raise really important questions for us and really important concerns among our members. The justification document is comprehensive from the standpoint of overall agency operations, but for some items, it would be useful for the agency to consider providing a bit more detail. For example, a short narrative on the requested budget relative to current year projected expenditures and historical expenditures would be helpful, which would clearly help put a consistent focus on the issue Vice Chair Hoffman raised regarding excess. It also would be helpful to have more detail about the proposed expenditures for the new FTE positions. The budget document lays out useful information, but the duties to be performed are there. On the one hand, there is no detail, on the other hand, about the compelling need or whether there is a compelling need for those duties to actually be performed. And so we're concerned about that as well. CUNA believes that the efficiency of NCUA's operations is essential to responsibly using credit union members' resources as NCUA seeks to become a world-class regulator. In general, credit unions, at least the ones that we represent, almost all credit unions, 90% of them, see the budget document's proposed increases in staffing as significant, costly, and unnecessary. I'd also like to raise a few specific issues on exam scope and process. First and foremost, CUNA has significant concern around any expansion in consumer protection examination activity. Our members believe altering the agency's risk-focused examination process and substantially increasing consumer examination-related expenditures is simply not warranted. There are a couple of important reasons we strongly object to these impulses. First, as its mission statement makes very clear, the NCUA exists chiefly to ensure the safety and soundness of the credit union system. Its examination program should remain focused on that primary objective. Second, the NCUA uncovers and cites occasional individual instances of credit union behaviors and member interactions that it sees as concerning. This suggests that the agency already has, through the risk-focused examination process and consumer complaint hotline, the resources and tools in place to investigate, uncover, and evaluate any deficiencies in any individual credit union's consumer compliance program. Proposed increases in expenditures, especially expansion of FTEs in this area, should be accompanied by a detailed rationale for such action with an eye on a narrow, non-expansive scope of supervision. Third, credit unions are the original consumer financial protectors. I think we can all agree on that. The unique credit union member ownership structure and not-for-profit status establishes powerful incentives that discourage anti-consumer behavior. These underlying characteristics set credit unions apart and encourage strong pro-social and pro-consumer behaviors. They provide a clear and powerful deterrent to anti-consumer behavior. NCUA examiners are keenly focused on any hint of anti-consumerism, and they take their jobs very seriously. Credit union members need no significant additional investment of NCUA resources to protect them from the institutions they own. Rules, regulations, and examinations should be tailored so they're not overly burdensome on the credit unions. Consumers lose when one-size-fits-all rules and burdensome examinations force credit unions to pull back safe and affordable options from the market, pushing consumers into the arms of unregulated entities engaged in the very activity that NCUA hopes to curtail. Consequently, an overwhelming majority of CUNA members reflect strong resistance to additional NCUA consumer protection oversight. We also caution the NCUA against drawing parallels between itself and bank regulators in terms of the resource allocation on examination priorities. Ultimately, each federal banking agency is tasked with overseeing significantly different entities with markedly different focuses, organizational structures, product offerings, and risk profiles. The fact that a regulator of a for-profit bank identifies a systemic need for the industry it regulates does not mean that other regulators, especially the regulator of not-for-profit cooperatives, ought to follow suit. In the context of over 125 million memberships, the known issues related to consumer compliance is exceedingly small. In this context, the best solution to this perceived problem is more education and compliance resources from NCUA and greater transparency on examination findings in the field, not longer, more detailed examinations. Let me be clear, CUNA and our lead partners are willing and able to aid the NCUA in ensuring credit unions are aware of any potential consumer compliance concerns being raised by the agency. This can be achieved through our regular communications, webinars, and trainings with credit union representatives, or potentially through a dedicated alert communication. As you know, CUNA and state leagues have always been strong partners with the NCUA in educating credit unions regarding examination and compliance issues. We all have the same vested interest in the financial health and well-being of. I wanted to also make a few comments on climate-related financial risks. As outlined in the NCUA's draft strategic plan, climate-related financial risk is rising. Some of the immediate and short-term effects of recent climate changes are predictable and have been observed. However, longer-term effects can merely be estimated and may ultimately be impossible to predict. The frequency and severity of weather-related disasters is likely to increase and the consequent damage will likely be compounded by continued population growth and urbanization in those areas. That's what the experts tell us. CUNA agrees these developments may pose a significant risk to the U.S. economy and the U.S. financial system. Credit unions need to consider how all risks, including climate-related risks, could affect their membership and institutional performance. For their part, credit unions need additional tools to address these risks, however. Continued significant field of membership reform is one of the fundamental ways to help institutions accomplish this goal. The ability to diversify fields of membership by industry, geographically, can clearly help many lower exposure to climate-related risks. In a similar vein, loan portfolio diversification also can be a powerful tool, and we believe our work centered on removing the member business lending cap is paramount to achieving this goal. CUNA applauds the NCUA's support of efforts on these risk diversification issues historically, and we look forward to working with the agency to explore what additional steps might be taken down the road. We've not seen details of NCUA's contemplated actions related to climate risk, but we recognize the importance of dialogue and the power of a comprehensive market-based solution as the agency proceeds with its efforts in this area. Industry leaders have significant concerns around the possibility that the agency is contemplating actions that many see as meddling and/or mandates. CUNA would, of course, strongly resist any regulatory initiative that might take on these characteristics. My written comments include a few other key issues that I'd like to revisit from previous dialogue that we've had. And in the interest of time, I'll just simply mention these briefly, several of them. First, the extended examination cycle. Recent efforts by the NCUA to extend the examination cycle for certain credit unions have been positive, particularly for credit unions, which 12-month cycle was clearly unnecessary. More can be, and in our view, should be done on this front. The state and federal policy responses to the COVID-19 crisis resulted in unusually strong deposit inflows from federal fiscal stimulation and stimulus efforts, increasing the number of $1 billion credit unions by a total of nearly 70 in the 18 months ending June 2021. At the institution level, those increases generally occurred against a backdrop of substantial growth in low-risk investments and little increase in risk profiles. For this reason, and others outlined in our written comments, we therefore again urge the NCUA to extend the credit union asset threshold for the 18-month examination cycle from $1 billion to $3 billion. That would be in line with the banking agencies. Secondly, I'd just like to talk for a moment about PCA flexibility. Regulators across the government, as you know, took swift and appropriate action to implement accommodations to help regulated entities navigate the pandemic and ensure the economic crisis basically related to the COVID-19 pandemic provided sufficient flexibility. During the COVID crisis, the decline in the capital ratio was not an indicator of an unhealthy credit union, but rather an indicator of the impact of an event that was widely considered to be temporary. Otherwise, healthy credit unions should not be forced to reserve extra to accommodate rigid statutory and regulatory capital requirements when their capital declines as a result of a natural disaster, pandemic, or other external crisis. CUNA has encouraged Congress, including as recently as last week, to enact legislation that provides temporary flexibility to NCUA to offer forbearance from PCA to otherwise healthy credit unions impacted by federally declared emergency disasters. We appreciate your support for these efforts to bring more agency flexibility on this front. Finally, the NCUSIF, the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund, remains strong. The fund's pre-pandemic equity ratio stood at 1.35% and finished 2020 at a historically robust 126 reading, despite this massive fiscal stimulus that I talked about previously. The credit union 1% deposit true-up in the third quarter of 2021 will likely mean the fund ratio will increase to 1.28% by year-end 2021, as estimated by agency staff. Given the overall health of credit unions, the health of the fund, and its historically favorable performance, we strongly object to any suggestion that the NCUA may need to charge an inclusive premium in the near future, and/or that statutory changes to the inclusive funding guidelines or policy for determining the normal operating level are needed. Every dollar spent over insuring the fund is a dollar that is not being used to benefit credit unions. On behalf of CUNA, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm happy to address any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Mike. You timed that just perfectly. Let's now turn to Ann. You may begin.
Good afternoon, Chairman Harper, Vice Chairman Hopman, and Board Member Hood. Thank you for the opportunity to deliver remarks before you today regarding the 2022-2023 staff draft budget justification. My name is Ann Koschev. I'm the Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at NAFCU. I would like to thank the NCUA Board for its leadership and ongoing commitment to ensuring a safe and sound credit union system and improving the lives of over 127 million credit union members across the country. Additionally, thank you to the NCUA staff who prepared this budget justification and other budget materials. NAFCU supports the NCUA Board's transparency surrounding the budget and applauds the NCUA for publishing a detailed draft budget. However, despite this transparency, NAFCU would like to stress that policy changes should not be announced in budget documents, but rather released through a separate notice and request for comment or letter to credit unions. Furthermore, the agency's commitment to credit unions should spur efforts to achieve year-over-year budget decreases and not increases, especially through incorporating lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic. NAFCU and its credit unions and their members are all eager for a post-pandemic world, but recognize that certain necessities during the pandemic carry great promise for the future. NAFCU commends the agency for utilizing the savings achieved in 2020 and in 2021 to fund its day-to-day operations, and continues to stress the need to fully adopt lessons learned in its approach to examinations to achieve long-term budget reductions. Pandemic-related savings aside, the NCUA's budget continues to increase, and this 2022-2023 draft budget overlooks opportunities to incorporate more efficient processes with potential cost savings. In fact, the 2022 operating budget would increase by 3.6%, and the 2023 operating budget would increase by over 13%. But the operating budget currently contains a surplus, and NAFCU reiterates its earlier request, recently echoed by Board Member Hood and Vice Chairman Hopman just today, to return any surplus funds to credit unions directly or via a credit against 2022 budgeted expenses. Additionally, the draft budget calls for a total of 48 new full-time equivalents in 2022, mainly for added examiners. This unnecessary focus on increasing the number of examiners without first explaining which risks they are intended to mitigate, the cost of failures in their absence, and why current resources are insufficient renders the process opaque. Much like last year, NAFCU recommends the agency focus on implementing lessons learned from the pandemic and not losing sight of the cost savings achieved during this difficult time in the interest of returning to pre-pandemic spending and travel. Accordingly, NAFCU offers the following recommendations to enhance the efficiency of the NCUA's 2022-2023 budget. 1, preserve the strength of the Share Insurance Fund without overburdening credit unions with exorbitant operating fees or unnecessary SIF assessments. 2, maintain the existing exam flex criteria for credit unions to qualify for extended exams and incorporate exam modernization efforts, including a hybrid virtual and in-person exam posture. 3, achieve greater transparency regarding cybersecurity expenses. And 4, continue to support financial inclusion through the Access Initiative with a focus on enhancing fielded membership and other growth opportunities. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed tremendous stress on credit unions. Despite these challenges, this year's draft budget classifies industry performance over the period or over the prior year as solid and considers the system to be very well capitalized. The NCUA projects that the equity ratio for the SIF will end the year at 1.28%, comfortably above the statutory minimum. That the outlook for both the overall economy and the industry is generally favorable demonstrates the inherent strength of the credit union industry. The NCUA's budget documents highlight several risks beyond those associated with the general economy. A recent NAFCU survey shows that credit unions are generally aligned in viewing these areas as ones that warrant extra attention, and they are making tangible investments to monitor and mitigate risks. For example, our survey members are devoting nearly 8% of their operating budget towards cybersecurity risks, which is more than double what they were spending 5 years ago. 90% expect technology spending to drive expenses over the next 3 years to better enable them to compete with fintech companies and to meet the evolving needs of members. And over 70% identified fraud prevention as an area of focus for their planned IT spending. The credit union industry is in solid condition and attuned to the key risks facing it, as the NCUA considers its supervisory stance on specific risk areas, and in a more general sense, it should do so in a holistic manner. Every dollar and staff hour that credit unions spend funding agency operations and fulfilling compliance requirements are ones that will not go toward investments in the credit union or expanding the credit union's membership. Following the finalization of the 2021-2022 budget, the NCUA board committed to adopting lessons learned from the pandemic to save valuable credit union dollars. In 2021, travel expenses were still unusually low, again saving the agency and the industry money. But now the agency assumes that travel restrictions will be lifted in 2022 and is proposed to increase its travel budget by nearly 70% and another 17.5% in 2023 to reflect a full year of travel spending. The increase in proposed 2022 travel costs should be scrutinized using cost-benefit analysis that considers the benefit of focusing on improving the agency's virtual exam process now versus the cost of sending examiners across the country for in-person exams. The agency has also not yet announced its reopening plans. Without an NCUA headquarters fully open for business, NAFCU questions why the agency is so eager to allocate such a substantial amount of funds for travel. The pandemic has required the agency to conduct virtual exams and begin gathering more information for the transition to primarily virtual exams within the next few years. NAFCU supports the use of more virtual exams, but also recognizes the value of in-person interactions. Therefore, a hybrid approach that maintains some in-person meetings is in the best interest of credit unions, the agency, and the agency's budget. The agency should reconsider its proposed travel budget because of the potential for prolonged pandemic-related uncertainty that may reduce the feasibility of travel for a large segment of the agency's workforce. The third largest portion of the NCUA's operating budget is travel expenses. So considering the lessons learned from 2020 and 2021 regarding the extent to which supervisory and exam operations can be conducted off-site, NAFCU encourages the NCUA to cut travel costs across the board going forward. The draft budget includes 29 FTEs for additional examiners to conduct more annual exams of credit unions with less than $1 billion that might otherwise qualify for an extended exam. This proposal is unaccompanied by data or a justification beyond the specter of future economic uncertainty. Even more confounding is that the agency's speculative concerns about the economy contradict statements made in the economic outlook section of the proposed budget. NAFCU opposes the proposed 29 new FTEs and is concerned about the less than transparent fashion which the NCUA has chosen to pursue this change. Instead of burying this proposed change in the draft budget, the NCUA should release this proposal to the ExamFlex criteria through a separate notice and request for comment or letter to credit unions with a thorough justification for the change. To be clear, NAFCU supports a strong, safe, and sound credit union system, and appropriate supervision of systemic risk is critical. However, this attempt to expand exams for a large swath of the credit union industry without evidence of tangible risks to the CIF or the industry is improper and unwarranted. Instead, the NCUA should continue its work to achieve the goals of the ExamFlex initiative, considering many well-run, low-risk credit unions that qualify have still not been cycled onto the extended exam. To better achieve its goal of reducing burdens on credit unions during the exam process, future virtual exams should be deployed on an 18-month or longer extended cycle for all low-risk, well-run credit unions, regardless of their size. At a minimum, the agency should seek to maintain parity with the extended exam threshold for banks by raising its threshold to $3 billion. Yet another reason why the additional 29 FTEs are unnecessary is because the agency's ongoing exam modernization initiative should create a more efficient supervision process, eliminating the need for additional examiners. NAFCU strongly supports the NCUA's commitment to modernizing its exam process and applauds the agency for being a leader among the banking regulators in adopting a modern examination system. The deployment of merit to all NCUA examiners in the fall of 2021, coupled with additional capital investments in 2022 to address rollout issues and allow for continued enhancements to merit, should permit the agency to achieve a more effective and efficient exam process. Credit unions remain committed to fair lending compliance and ensuring equal access to mortgage credit. However, NAFCU is concerned about the dramatic increase to fair lending exams in 2022 and the additional 4 FTEs dedicated to fair lending. Although we appreciate efforts to proactively resolve problems, the overall increase in fair lending exams seems substantial and unwarranted. The NCUA should return to only conducting fair lending exams when there is substantial evidence of a need, provide greater transparency regarding its exam selection process, and offer more lead time for credit unions selected for these exams. In terms of adding FTEs, NAFCU suggests that the NCUA implement a gradual increase over the next few years to better use existing resources and weigh the costs and benefits of additional FTEs. A significant portion of the NCUA's proposed budget provides funding for cybersecurity-related improvements designed to enhance the agency's overall security posture and compliance with Executive Order 14208. NAFCU supports efforts to strengthen the NCUA's cybersecurity and resilience to security threats, but the added value of new cybersecurity investments included in each budget cycle should be benchmarked using transparent metrics. The draft budget maps cybersecurity enhancements to the functional areas described in the NIST cybersecurity framework. However, the broad descriptions provided for certain investments make it difficult to assess how they are achieving their intended results. For certain investments, the NCUA does use a standard metric for benchmarking return on technology infrastructure investment. The use of similar metrics should be encouraged for all types of IT security-related investments and projects. Additionally, it would be helpful to provide a ranking of IT projects by their ROTII score. NAFCU applauds the NCUA's ongoing commitment to financial inclusion and supports the efforts of the NCUA's Access Initiative. The advancement of diversity, equity, and inclusion is of utmost importance to the strength of our financial system, and the financial inclusion championed by the Access Initiative is foundational to the progress of DEI. NAFCU supports the addition of 1 financial inclusion and outreach analyst and 1 access coordinator position in the draft budget and hopes that they will help the initiative move forward on its 5 focus areas. The NCUA should also continue to provide educational webinars and assist credit unions with the identification of grants and other financial resources to help members experiencing financial hardship. NAFCU has continually advocated for small dollar loan programs that make economic sense to credit unions and provide members with access to safe alternatives to payday lenders. Unfortunately, due to restrictions from the NCUA and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, short-term lending programs such as PALS have yet to gain widespread adoption and serve their intended purpose. The NCUA should consider a PALS 3 to provide additional options for credit unions to help members in need of responsible short-term small dollar loans. Small dollar loans are disproportionately relied on by lower income and younger households who face financial and liquidity challenges and are rationed from gaining access to sufficient levels of mainstream credit to meet their needs. The NCUA should continually work to increase inclusion by allowing credit unions to better serve individuals in underserved areas, including through online and mobile banking platforms. In addition, the NCUA must continue to ensure that CURE is well-funded and possesses the ability to support low-income designated credit unions, minority credit unions, and any credit union seeking to expand its field of membership to pursue these designations. NAFCU is pleased to see the addition of 2 FTEs for CURE in the draft budget. NAFCU encourages the agency to carefully consider and adopt the detailed suggestions outlined above in its final 2022-2023 budget. NAFCU thanks the NCUA board and recognizes the NCUA staff hard work in preparing this budget justification and other budget materials. Thank you again for the opportunity to deliver remarks before you today, and I welcome any questions you may have.
And thank you so much. Now let's turn to Lucy. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I know I'm having some audio issues, so if I'm not speaking loudly enough, can you please make some kind of motion and I will speak more loudly. Thank you. Chairman Harper, Vice Chairman Houtman, and Board Member Hood, thank you very much. NASCUS, our 45 regulator agencies at the state level and state credit unions across the country, thank you for holding today's budget briefing. This is the 6th year that we have been you've been holding these hearings and we've been participating in them since you reinstituted the practice in 2016. We certainly believe in this annual dialogue. It's a great chance for NCUA and your stakeholders to exchange what we've learned, and NASCUS genuinely welcomes the opportunity to foster greater transparency in NCUA's budgeting process. As we've stated previously, NASCUS has historically held the position that regulatory agencies are in the best position to determine what resources they need to maintain their safety and soundness supervisory programs. Therefore, we typically do not comment on specific amounts of NCUA's expenditures. However, we do wish to share our observations on NCUA staff's proposal for financing NCUA's operating and capital costs from the Share Insurance Fund through the overhead transfer rate, the OTR. Today, I'm going to focus on 3 topics. First, a reminder for all of us of why it's important for stakeholders to understand the overhead transfer rate. And then next, aspects of the 2022 draft budget and OTR implementation that strike us as counterintuitive. And then lastly, I will outline recommendations that we have for strengthening NCUSIF governance and OTR transparency. All right, why is it important for stakeholders to understand the OTR? I think earlier today, Eugene Sheed mentioned that it can get pretty technical, but the OTR is pretty dry, and many credit union system stakeholders, their eyes glaze over when we talk about the OTR. But it's still, my point is that it's important for both state chartered credit unions and federal credit unions to understand and closely monitor the overhead transfer rate for 3 reasons. First, every dollar that is transferred from the NCUSIF to fund NCUA expenses is a dollar that is not available to cover losses in the system. Subsequently, every dollar transferred may be a dollar that needs to be replenished in the fund by charging a premium to credit unions. So that's critical. That's why credit unions should pay attention. Second, NCUA covers its program costs from a combination of SIF dollars and federal credit union operating fees. Therefore, there's this inverse relationship between the OTR and the federal credit union operating rate. Using the OTR has the potential to imbalance the dual chartering system by disadvantaging the state system. And we consider this a threat to both state and federal credit unions. It's the dual charter framework that has been the most dynamic source of innovation and charter modernization. A robust state system benefits federal credit unions. A robust federal system benefits state credit unions. We need this give and take, this back and forth between the federal and state charters, especially as all credit unions face this digital world and an intensely competitive marketplace. To be clear, we believe that costs associated with administrating the fund should be allocated to the fund. However, when costs are over allocated to the SIF through the OTR, it artificially lowers the cost of the federal charter and the state charter is weakened as a result. This skews the competitive balance between the dual charter system, and we lose that benefit of regulatory and supervisory innovation that advances the entire system. Instead of lifting all boats, over allocation of cost to the the SIF impedes that mutual symbiotic growth between federal and state credit unions. A third reason that the OTR is important, and understanding is important, is the NCUA board in trying to navigate the pandemic, which is going to be with us for a while. The board has been deliberating on whether or not to increase the normal operating level of the SIF. It behooves credit unions to pay attention not only to the rate of the OTR, but what expenses actually get allocated to the fund for OTR treatment. Earlier in the staff comments of this briefing today, there was an explanation for the capital budget change. And we should pay attention to what is being allocated to the SIF and along with the rate itself. Each year, NCUA provides an explanation in your budget justification of what the primary drivers are that make either the OTR or the federal credit union operating fee go up and down. In 2019, 2020, and 2021, the rate went, the OTR went down and then up, and by small amounts. So definitely an improvement, much more predictable, as folks have pointed out, than the previous methodology. Anyway, in those 3 years, whether the rate went up or down, the primary driver was described as examination and supervision of federally insured state credit unions. What we've had difficulty understanding is exactly what in the examination of state charters has made that workload greater than NCUA's workload for federal credit unions. And this just all reminds us that the NCUA board has a fiduciary duty to protect the fund, both from the risks that credit unions face in the marketplace and in their operations, but also the risks of NCUA transferring NCUF dollars into NCUA to cover its program costs. Let me move now to aspects of the 2022 proposed budget and OTR implementation that have we find counterintuitive. First of all, it's a relative workload for NCUA between federal credit unions and state chartered credit unions. Today, the national system is amazingly evenly distributed. 50% of insured shares, 50% of assets, a very even split between federal and state charters. There is a difference in the number of units, though. I think NCUA just issued third quarter data, and 3,122 federal credit unions are in the system as compared with 1,868 federally insured state chartered credit unions. That means that NCUA has 1,250 more federal credit unions to monitor than state credit unions. This would make us expect that the workload would be greater for federal credit unions than state credit unions. Others have pointed to the 29 FTEs for regional credit union examiners. We are not questioning whether NCUA needs that, but we did note that, as others have, that part of the rationale appears to be the 18-month exam cycle. The text seems to suggest that the threshold for 2022 will be reduced from 1 billion to 500 million. That's 290 credit unions, if we understand the text correctly. I am not aware that any state agencies have agreed to a lowering of the 18-month eligibility threshold, and we just would expect then, if NCUA is doing this for federal credit unions, that would increase your workload for federal credit unions. Others have mentioned the $3 billion threshold for community banks, and in our case, we point to that as well. That not only puts credit unions at a relative disadvantage compared to community banks. This also increased the cost for state regulators, assuming that they're going on joint exams with NCUA. A second area that is counterintuitive for us is we took a look at the 2022-26 draft strategic plan, and the activities described in there imply that NCUA's costs as a prudential regulator in its prudential regulator role are going to be going up relative to NCUA's insurance role. We noted 8 additional FTEs in the areas of consumer financial protection and your access initiative, which we applaud, and BSA AML anti-money laundering activity. We presume that these costs are allocated to the fund at 0%, consistent with Principle 3 of the OTR methodology. Again, this would suggest then that the relative workload for federal credit unions would be higher. A third area, capital budget allocation, and with thanks to Eugene Sheed for explaining our possible misunderstanding about the capital budget allocation and the mere change in timing. But just to point out that we do understand it's the allocation to the NCUSF, so 63.4% OTR in 2022. If the amount was 50% of your cost versus 100% of your cost being subjected to the OTR mechanism, that would mean basically 31.7% of those costs being covered by the NCUSIF. And a $4.2 million difference in what would stay in the fund. Just as a side note, in the comment process for the OTR methodology and the Federal Credit Union fee schedule last year, the change impacted the OTR, just exposed for us a gap in the OTR methodology that the Federal Credit Union operating fee needs to be considered. The fourth item that we found counterintuitive about this year's proposed budget is that we actually agreed. Well, let me restate that this is in the area of costs associated with monitoring third-party vendor risk and QSO risk. In the OTR methodology, our reading of it indicates that 100% of those costs are to be allocated to the fund and therefore the OTR. You actually proposed for 2022 for federal credit union costs that we understand from the text that that's included in the 50% allocation of Principle 1. Even though we agree with your application of that, that's not how we read the methodology. So it just finds us that the OTR methodology should be revisited and reviewed so that we can clarify exactly which principles apply. Let me close by outlining our recommendations for strengthening NCUSIF governance and OTR transparency. This is in our shared interest of strengthening the governance of the fund and reviewing the appropriateness of the 4 principles of the 2017 methodology. Recommendation number 1, we recommend that NCUA add independent review of NCUA's workload analysis by an acceptable neutral entity. This would assure that the NCUA board that the agency is fulfilling its fiduciary duty to protect the fund, not only from marketplace and credit union operational risks, but also from risks of NCUA's direct access to the fund as a funding source. Secondly, reverse the November 2015 NCUA board decision to delegate calculation and administration of the OTR, given the foundational importance of proper cost allocation and the board's duty to both federal and state credit unions, this authority should not be delegated. 3, add SSA validation of regional workload estimates as a step in the OTR calculation process. 4, add NCWA's workload analysis as a standing appendix to the staff draft budget justification so that increases or decreases to the OTR and actual costs paid by the fund are easily reviewed by stakeholders. 5, adjust the amount of NCWA's capital budget allocated to the OTR mechanism from 100% to 50% as rationalized by an open and transparent publication of NCWA's workload analysis. 6, amend policy 1 to better reflect the relative burden on NCWA's time. Add a percentage of credit union units to the percentage of insured shares as a pertinent basis for distributing costs among charter types. If NCWA believes that you already account for this, please publish the workload analysis so that we can affirm that the methodology is sound and credible. Number 7, amend NCWA's policies 1 and 2 to assure that treatment of costs, it does for third-party risk and CUSO risk, that is consistent with principles 1 and 2.
Lucy, if you could wrap up, we're out of time.
Thank you very much. And then minor recommendations in correcting footnote 24, deleting equipment because the Share Insurance Fund no longer pays for SSA laptops or other equipment. And then also a recommendation that's in my written remarks about the graphic that's used to show sources of funding. I close by thanking the board members. It has been a true honor to work with all of you these many years. Our comments today are made in the spirit of true collaboration. I know that each one of you values the dual charter system, so thank you. Our comments are made in that spirit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lucy. Carrie, you may begin.
Thank you, Chairman Harper. Thank you also, Vice Chairman Hopman and Board Member Hood. It is a great pleasure to be here today and give some comments on behalf of the Virginia Credit Union League. I have only been president and CEO of the league for 5 short months, and it is with that fresh perspective that I've looked at the NCWA budget, read every word, and as I'll discuss, I've read a lot of other things as well in looking at how the agency approaches how it spends its money. You know, Virginia is really blessed with a diverse set of credit unions, both state chartered, federally chartered, large, small, and with local and national fields of membership. So it is with this perspective that I give you some comments. And, you know, each of those credit unions, like others have mentioned today, is an important stakeholder in how the NCUA chooses to spend those funds and really in the execution of its mission. I, throughout my career, agree with the mantra that credit unions exist to provide provident credit. And everything that the agency does in one way or the other has an impact on that mission. And in particular, you know, the budget is one of the most important things because every dollar the credit union is spending to support the NCUA, which is supporting it, is money that it can deploy out to its members and in the community. Of course, like others have mentioned, this year's budget does represent a 1.2% increase over the current budget. And of course, any increase, and this increase is of interest to our credit union members. But I do want to focus my time on really discussion about how the NCUA is spending that money. And from my perspective, the agency needs to make sure it's addressing the entire credit union industry and of all types. And I to that end, I really, when I looked at this budget, you know, I was just asking myself, how can the NCUA use its resources to support the industry as a whole and fulfill its mission? And it's with that basic framework that I started to look at everything. Before I delve into the budget, though, I also want to reiterate the support for Board Member Hood's leadership in focusing on the potential to return money to credit unions from the operating fund, either whether it ultimately be offset or direct. I think that everyone appreciates those hard looks. And I also joined the other industry leaders in calling for the return of the normal operating level back down to 1.3%. As to the budget, stakeholders deserve accountability and transparency. And I really appreciate the fact that the agency is presenting a clear, accessible, and transparent proposal. I'm not sure everyone wants to read the budget, but this one was very readable, and I really want to applaud the staff for the time they put into that, because I know it takes time to make something that is clear. What I was struck with, though, is that this budget does generally reflect the agency's current focus, which raised the question in my mind as to how the agency will mesh the budget proposal with the future-focused strategic plan that is still in the proposal stage. From my perspective, credit unions do benefit from a forward-thinking, vibrant regulator that exists to administer the Federal Credit Union Act and really provide a framework for the cooperative industry, all of it. And I do think that over the course of my career, we've seen that, and we're in a much different place than we were, even when Board Member Hood, I think you were on the board previously, and Chairman Harper, when you were at the NCUA on the staff side. So I absolutely recognize that the agency has, grown and evolved. But as the agency itself notes, it has two jobs. It's a safety and soundness regulator via the insurance fund, and it's a functional regulator. And when I look at this budget, I wonder whether it does strike the right balance between those dual functions. And it really comes down to risk. And does the agency need to recalibrate how it's approaching risk to allow for more innovation and growth of credit unions? As many of the other presenters have discussed, a lot of the budget proposal does address exam issues and directly with safety and soundness. The agency is adding resources to return some credit unions to a yearly exam cycle, specifically 9 full FTEs. It's also increasing specialist staff and adding staff to fair lending. So almost any budget of an organization, staff and salaries are going to be the biggest chunk of that. So inevitably, these increases are tremendously significant in terms of the largest percentage of the budget. So the question is, are these resources really needed? They appears to be predicated on the premise that credit unions are becoming more complex or risky due to present marketplace circumstances, or perhaps their deficiencies in fair lending or in other areas. But certainly in the budget document and in general, when I look at the general conditions that are out there in credit unions, I don't think that the agency has presented enough justification for this current assessment. As to risk, it certainly looks like the agency is presenting some issues that are in all likelihood transitory or due to economic uncertainty. And I think that we need to have a better assessment of whether or not additional resources are needed, or whether these areas of uncertainty can be addressed through just management on the credit union side first. Relative to complexity, the agency is also adding specialists in electronic payments, information systems officers, and regional lending specialists. So again, I want to emphasize that I do think the agency needs to be forward-looking and making sure that it is dealing with appropriate risks, but whether adding examiners is the appropriate tool in this circumstance is again a question that I would raise. And I'll talk a little about that later. When we look at safety and soundness and the agency focusing on new risks such as cybersecurity, I think we need to make sure that the agency isn't necessarily just spending its way into an area of zero risk, because we do need to leave space for innovation, and we actually need to leave room for credit unions to go ahead and proactively look at and take care of these risks on their own. We do need credit unions to be well run and well managed, and certainly it's appropriate for this to be an area that credit unions need to focus on, but we also need to give them the opportunity to succeed at that. The NCUA has announced that it's expanding and moving forward with its merit program and also focusing on the agency-wide use of data. You know, one of the areas when merit was first announced and developed and introduced over the course of several years, one of the biggest areas or expectations that merit would provide is actually having more efficient and exams that result in data so that the NCUA can head off risks ahead of time, as opposed to having to deal with the horse that's already left the barn. So ultimately, the merit program, you know, it is, once it is fully up and running, supposed to provide more efficiencies for the entire industry. So I would ask the agency to take another look in terms of its exam expectations and really see if we just need for the merit system to play out, or whether or not we need to add additional exam resources, because I don't want us to end up in a situation where we've paid for and are paying for merit, which, you know, ultimately, in general, you know, the industry supported with some caveats. And then, you know, now we're adding additional examiners and all of these additional resources. So if the risk is here, let's have a solution that is here, as opposed to having layers upon layers of potential regulation or examination. So I will also note that we have a lot of guardrails on the functional side of things that help protect against a lot of these risks and issues that get looked at on the exam side. And in recent months, I've reread the entire Federal Credit Union Act. No, I was not trying to, you know, go to sleep or have insomnia, but and in my look, I didn't start just looking at current law, but I looked at a lot of the old text, the Federal Credit Union Act, and a lot of those amendments. And my goal was to really see the evolution of the NCUA, the agency, the industry, and get a good picture of how we've grown and evolved, because I really do think we're at this moment in time where we've learned all of these lessons out of COVID. Prior to COVID, we had the start of fintechs and the Googles of the world entering the financial space. And we're having consumers take more and more control of their own finances through mobile apps, and using all of these other technologies to change all of these behaviors. And since I truly do believe that credit unions provide the absolute best and provident credit, how can we make sure that we are being innovative and thoughtful in making sure that our industry has the resources that it needs and the leadership that it needs to take this industry forward? And when I looked at what the credit unions used to be, certainly I'm not suggesting we need to go back to the 1930s or 1970s, but there always has been a spirit of innovation in credit unions, whether it be shared branching, whether it be using you know, imaging for checks. And I do think that we need to do a better job at fostering innovation, so that we can make sure that our industry thrives and survives. And I do think the NCUA has a part in that. I salute the NCUA for discussing and focusing on fintech initiatives, looking at, you know, cryptocurrency and digital assets for credit unions. But I do think there is more room for the NCUA to quickly act when credit unions come to it and need, you know, really their perspective on some of these ultimate private market, you know, solutions. You know, in one previous incarnation of the NCUA, there was actually a more formal structure for credit unions to serve on the NCUA board, and there was a presidential appointed administrator. You know, that structure didn't last very long, but I do think we could benefit and should benefit from a more formal advisory Committee of Credit Unions, so that the NCUA and credit unions have a more formal way to give the agency feedback on areas that the credit unions have expertise in. I absolutely appreciate all of the leadership and outreach from this board. I think this board has done more outreach to credit unions than any other board that I can remember, and certainly in recent history. But I do think having a formal mechanism for credit unions to engage could be very helpful for helping us all work together. I also want to note that in the budget materials, of course, the agency noted that it reviews 1/3 of its regulations annually. I think that's incredibly positive, but given the pace of today's world, credit unions do need I think a higher level of nimbleness, and for us to be able to act very quickly when we need change. Like others, I applaud what the agency did during COVID in terms of being responsive to credit unions. But I'm always one who's looking to improve, and I think we can do things faster and better sometimes, so that credit unions can get the help that they need sooner. I think that the Office of General Counsel could potentially play a bigger role in issuing more risk alerts or legal opinion letters on areas of importance to credit unions, and really flag some of those issues. One thing that I've learned, even in the short time that I have been in my current role, is how much credit unions need to talk to each other and have lessons learned from each other. And the agency can do a lot in that area so that credit unions can operate efficiently and effectively. I also want to take a moment and speak to legislative initiatives. I think in addition to the regulatory review, the NCUA can take a more active look at changes to the Federal Credit Union Act and a more active role in supporting those changes. Again, the NCUA certainly has its own legislative agenda that it presents during periodic reports to Congress, but it could also be more active in soliciting ideas from credit unions on legislative change. Lastly, I do want to spend a few moments in talking about the agency's support for small credit unions. And the agency has outlined assistance for small credit unions in this budget. It seems that most of that, I believe, will be in the form of 2 FTEs to the CURE office to provide some, consulting grants of those types of activities. I do think the agency needs to look at that work, which is incredibly important, and see if it needs to be or should be conducted directly through the NCUA, or if better outcomes might be achieved with partnerships and grants through other entities. As a league president, I can point to things that the Virginia Credit Union League does, that other leagues do, that other entities and partners do to help small credit unions. But I have to say, I think the solution to
Carrie, if you could wrap it up, you're over time.
Oh, absolutely. A small, one thing that we could do is see if there's greater partnerships that we could engage with. One thing I love is the FDIC's mission-driven fund, and I would note that that fund has $120 million of seed money from Microsoft and from Truist, and that money is going to be deployed to help MDIs and also community development institutions. I think we need to think of creative solutions like these. Thank you.
And Carrie, we are looking, staff have been diligently looking in whether we can create a similar capitalization fund, not just for current and existing credit unions, but also for those credit unions that are looking for capital so that they can begin providing services. I want to thank all of you for your really detailed thoughts. I do have just one question for each of you today. First, let me start with Anne. In your statement, you talked about greater transparency related to cybersecurity investments. And to protect against compromise, we have to be careful. We can't share all of the cybersecurity secrets, but could you give me a little better idea about what you have in mind or what details would be helpful to you?
Thank you for that question. Of course, we understand the concern and sensitivity and inability to share too much publicly. But as our written comments will reflect in a little more detail, we do think that there are some opportunities to just explain in each budget cycle the metrics and benchmarks that you're using and how the intended investments into cybersecurity and resiliency efforts will pan out, and exactly how you're relying on benchmarking, like the return to technology infrastructure investment.
And I did take your comment earlier about the need to show sort of a ranking of projects. We do have an internal process where we do rank projects to make some determinations there, and we can explore what we can do there for disclosures. Mike, let me turn to you. I see that CUNA has again raised concerns about the agency revolving its consumer financial protection program to address more complex institutions. You also note that the agency should stay focused on safety and soundness. Yet credit unions need to comply with many consumer financial protection laws. If not the NCUA, then which agency did Congress contemplate having the responsibility for compliance with those consumer financial protection laws? And how should the NCUA meet those responsibilities for credit unions with less than $10 billion in assets?
We think it is the NCUA's responsibility. It's a matter of how much you focus on it and to what extent you dedicate funds for that activity. And our argument is that, in some respects, an expansion is a problem or a solution looking for a problem. That, given the level of interactions that you've seen and that you reported earlier, it seems like in the context of almost 30 million memberships across the United States today, it doesn't seem to rise to the level of more focus and a greater burden on institutions. Structure matters a lot, and it does affect behaviors. We just are not aware of a large systemic problem.
So I will say I sit in a different seat, and I've seen data on our quality control reviews of the limited amount of consumer financial protection programming that we do. And we've seen problems, for example, last year with the Truth in Lending Act, we saw persistent problems with the Electronic Fund Transfer Act, and we also saw problems with the Fair Credit Reporting Act, and it was affecting a good number of the institutions in the reviews. We need to have a broader base, in my view, particularly for the most complex credit unions that are nearing CFPB oversight, so that we hand off a baton, not drop the baton, as those credit unions cross over the threshold into CFPB oversight. Carrie, I want to jump to you. I really appreciated your research and insights on supporting small credit unions and maintaining their viability. I have to admit, I've been working on these issues now for more than 2 decades, and you helped me to learn some things that I didn't necessarily know. Your testimony called on us to view the issue of small credit union support through a different lens. How should we be supporting directly those credit unions with, less than $10 million or assets, or $50 million in assets? What metrics would you like to see, and what level? How should we structure that support?
Well, I think the issues of small credit unions, they share a lot of the same issues that larger credit unions have in some areas, such as attracting appropriate talent, succession planning. So a lot of those issues, generally are shared and folded into, how you look at the success of a credit union industry overall. In particular, I do think that credit unions, small credit unions, have huge expenses with trying to structure some of those back office things they have to do in a cost-effective manner, because consumer patterns are changing. And in order for a small credit union to attract new members and actually provide the services that their members need and want, it costs more than it used to provide that, because the expectation is that there will be mobile banking, there will be some of those other resources. So I think that in the past, a lot of the specific, I would say, consulting that the agency may have done relative to small credit unions, I'm not saying wasn't necessarily helpful, but it's just a lot bigger. The challenges are bigger than they ever used to be. So I think the solution has to be much bigger than any federal agency's focus. So we really do need, it really does take a village to make sure that we are thinking in creative ways and establishing some of those partnerships. So whether it's the industry, not necessarily NCUA, whether it's the industry create some sort of off-the-shelf, back office solution, whether we try to get credit unions together to create more CUSOs, that's part of why we have, leagues and we have other associations to help credit unions. I don't think that the NCUA is going to have the answer just with its function as a government agency. So I think we really need to have hard conversations as to what that assistance needs to be, because it's extremely can be wide as to what that really needs to be.
I certainly look forward to having those long discussions and hard discussions with you and others in the industry, because I do think we need to figure out what we can do to support small credit unions in a more viable way to ensure their long-term viability overall. Finally, let me turn to you, Lucy. I have long appreciated your keen focus on addressing the needs of federally insured state chartered credit unions. In that regard, I'm interested in learning more about your observations about how the NCUA could alter the process for determining the workload analysis for state-based credit unions. While I suspect that NCUA and our state partners would agree in most instances about what the workload analysis should be and where the focus should be, there may be times when we have a difference of opinion. For example, the NCUA may see greater risks to the share insurance fund. If we move forward with your suggestions, how might we resolve such differences of opinion?
I do think that enabling states to validate the workload assumptions that are made by the regions, and not knowing what the workload analyses look like, I'm kind of just assuming a few things, but just validating that, looking forward, okay, this is what the regional office envisions for the coming year. And there's going to be disagreement from time to time, but at least validating the workload that would be going to the region versus the state agency. And then again, I know you can't provide the entire workload analysis as an appendix to the budget justification, but just enough so that all stakeholders can see, that's this part of state programs is what made the OTR go up, or this part of federal credit union work is what made the OTR go down. And the OTR will go up and down. We understand that, but right now there's no way of validating that the assumptions and the analysis that they're valid and credible.
So I was trying to get down to the point about if we have a disagreement between the state regulator and the NCUA, how could we resolve that?
Just speaking, and like you say, you're not going to agree on everything, but just speaking with one another about it so that, all right, the two parties understand where the other is coming from.
All righty. Lucy, thank you so much. Vice Chairman Hauptman, the floor is yours.
Thanks, you all. Thank you, the chairman. Thank you for those comments. I read the written ones as well. Let me just mention this. In 2010, credit unions paid 27 grand to the NCUA per year for our regulatory and insurance services. That was the price we charged, 27,000 per credit union. Throw in inflation from then till now, that would come to about 32 grand. We now charge 65,000 per credit union every year. Let me start with Mike. For that amount of money and that increase, it's vastly above inflation, 65,000 every year. Do the credit unions deserve top-notch service for that price? Mike, you there, buddy?
I'm sorry.
Mike,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Oh, no problem. It was an anodyne one. I was just saying that, in 2010, we charged 27 grand a year for each credit union for our services at NCUA. We now charge 65,000. That's vastly above inflation. For that price, do you deserve excellent? Your credit unions deserve top-notch 5-star service for that amount of money?
Yeah, I would say they would agree with that.
Gotcha. From that time, 2010 to now, there's been remarkable changes in the way we react to things. You have, Yelp and TripAdvisor and delivery services where you rate each other each time. You can't even use DoorDash until you rate the last one. You can't even get an Uber. So they get 100% constant same-day feedback, and they communicate their priorities. Would it make sense for us to do something similar? After exams, just make sure that the examiner and the CEO of the credit union are on the same page immediately after the exam, kind of like an Uber ride.
Yeah, actually, that was part of our commentary for a number of years, and really got nowhere. So decided not to bother you with it anymore. But we all think that that's a great idea. We all think that they deserve to see value, and if they don't see value, and if there are dislocations within the exam teams and dysfunction, that should be knowable to agency leadership. And that's not necessarily, an attempt to necessarily punish an individual examiners or anything of that nature, but to improve the process. So, I think it always helps for anybody providing a service to have feedback on whether or not that service is providing value and where the dislocation and dysfunction is.
Thank you for that. I agree. I think he'd probably be supportive. We've got a pilot program right now with a quick, 5-question yes/no survey immediately after the exam to the credit union CEO and then the examiner. Find out right away if something's off. Like you said, it's not necessarily about good or bad behavior by anybody. It's to find out immediately if something's off. For example, was everything you have to do going forward put in writing? If one party says yes, the other party says no, you immediately know something's off there. And the questions you ask, communicate your priorities every single time. For example, regulators in general often just had an ombudsman. People don't call and complain about their regulator very often, especially when by not doing things like recording the exams and that sort of thing, you're giving the attitude that you actually don't care that much about feedback because it's so easy to do these days. Most of us haven't checked out of a hotel for 2 hours before you get the email that says, "How was your stay at the Scranton and Wilkes-Barre?" But
I would say that, you do actually want to know which teams are scoring very highly on those.
100%. Yeah. And
you can learn from them and improve those that aren't scoring so highly.
Yeah. And agree with you. If we're going from 27 grand a year and now we charge 65 for our services, I think I think it's overdue for regulators in general, but I'm just at NCUA. For regulators in general to provide that kind of feedback, it's flat out useful too, the information you get. And for that matter, I just want to give a shout out to Lucy and just say I cannot agree more on the value of the state charter as well. It's not in every single state, but it does provide a little bit of quasi competition and a comparison to NCUA. And I will mention this. what I was just talking about at that, for lack of a better term, Uber, DoorDash style immediate feedback real quick. Um, the state regulators were super useful in this because the state regulators, many of them, have been doing this for a long time. So it gave us ideas. Some of them ask you to rate from 1 to 10, et cetera. And I'll give credit to the Biden administration. They're making all of their departments, like the VA, have that sort of quantitative immediate feedback. And as you know, it's not just the feedback. The fact that you're asking for it and what you're asking solves many of the problems to start with. If Uber and Lyft, the first questions I always ask are navigation and cleanliness. Both of them ask that right at the top. And by consequence, they're cleaner. It's not just about busting the car that was dirty. They're telling you every single time. So that's more of a comment than a question. I know everybody hates that when people do that at conferences, but I just could not agree more on state charter. I wish all 50 states had it, but it was a godsend. I've accumulated a folder here on my computer of the different states and their feedback mechanisms.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it's and you do point out how both the state and federal systems, we're so lucky to have this dual charter framework. It was brilliant when our foremothers developed it. So
As Justice Brandeis said, the states are laboratories of democracy, and you can learn good things and bad things, et cetera.
yes.
To Carrie, your written comments and what you said here, you mentioned we should, examine how we approach risk, the concept of risk, to allow more innovation and growth. That's what your letter said.
Yes.
100% agree. We often talk about, what's riskier, keeping your money in cash or the stock market? Well, obviously the answer is, when do you need the money? And if you need it next week, the stock market's pretty risky. But the reason I'm all in the stock market, because what's my risk? My risk isn't having it next week. My risk is having enough money when I'm older for my family. So in that case, keeping money in checking account would be extraordinarily risky for me. I would miss out on massive growth that I need. To that end, I think I agree with you. I think that we want to take a longer run view of risk, both to our agency, because if we let the credit union system decline and don't let you guys innovate and compete with fintechs, et cetera, NCUA is going to wind up being the credit union division of the FDIC. It will not be an independent regulator because you won't need it for, 1,000 credit unions. But let me ask you this: with the long run health of credit unions, is it better off if we just provide certainty that unless credit unions are breaking a specific rule, that credit unions do what they think is best for their communities?
I think in general, yes, I do think that the credit unions, I think inherent in the credit union structure, we have an additional safety net that other financial institutions don't, and that they are not-for-profit member-owned cooperatives. And yes, there's certain types of credit unions, and credit unions can take secondary capital in limited, circumstances overall. Because of that mechanism, there's this inherent safety net as to how credit unions have to approach the deployment and use of those funds. So I do think that, well-run, well-managed credit unions who, look at risk themselves, because that's what credit unions have to do, are in the best seat and best position to make those decisions with, as you described, the regulatory guardrails and statutory guardrails that already exist.
Gotcha, 100%. We're not your mom. We provide some rules, and if you're not breaking them, you should do what you do best. Otherwise, how can we hold you accountable if you're not free to innovate? And let me tell you a story, and I'm going to ask Mike and Ann about this too. Just an example of the importance of clarity, and early clarity being better than later clarity. We had a credit union in California put out some press releases. They're doing this new partnership with a crypto exchange. People can buy and sell Bitcoin via their primary financial institution, which polls say most people would rather do. They went ahead and didn't. They didn't ask us permission. They looked at the rules. It wasn't breaking any rules. It doesn't break any rules. That same partnership was not accepted. I have a list of over 25 credit unions that wanted to do the exact same thing, but maybe didn't have as aggressive as CEOs. The exact same thing. They didn't do it or said, wait. You know why? Because they were concerned, what would our regulator think? I don't know if my regulator will like that. And there's probably plenty other examples like that. Even though nobody thinks this breaks any rules on its face. It doesn't. So is that something you can relate to in this job you have now in your prior one? That there's a hesitancy to do new things or new projects and partnerships and spend time and money because you're not sure your regulator is going to be okay with it, even though it doesn't necessarily break any rules. Carrie?
Definitely yes. I mean, I don't even, yes.
All right. All right. I want to, so I just want to start with Mike and then Ann. That general notion of, I don't know if my examiner is going to smile at this, you know, even though it doesn't break any rules. Is that something you think that, whatever you want to call that, that uncertainty hanging over your head, that you don't want to spend months and thousands of dollars on a project and then have your examiner look askance at it, even though it doesn't break a rule? Is that something you've encountered with your members, you know, as you try to do new things like compete with fintechs?
I not only encounter it with our members, I serve on the board of a $5 billion credit union. I can tell you in the boardroom, that is a constant concern.
So not doing things you would like to do that you obviously feel would benefit your membership. Things you want to do that are good, don't break any rules, but they're not doing it because they were worried about regulatory, you know, issues.
We think long and hard about the supervisory implications of everything that we do. I think that's a fair statement. And I wouldn't necessarily say we, and at the end of the day, avoid doing a lot of things that we are concerned about, but you know, it makes us less nimble. We take a longer period of time to noodle through any new initiative, and you know, in general, I think in a lot of cases have to we get to the point where we feel like we have to involve supervisory authorities in a lot of our decisions. So yeah, I don't know that that's the perfect situation to be in if you're competing against fintechs that, you know, essentially don't have those considerations.
Yeah, and that's a $5 billion credit union, which in our world is fairly large. A credit union with 11 employees doesn't necessarily have time or resources or lawyers to think of these things. Yeah, and let me just throw that to Ann too. The point I'm getting at is for our budget, we're 65,000 a year. Again, it was 27,000 in 2010. For that amount, we should be giving you the certainty. This is my view, and you can disagree with me. We should be giving you the certainty that we're not going to hold back for the price we're charging. We're not going to hold back your innovative efforts.
Yes, thank you for the question. You know, I continue to hear, and everyone at NAFCU continues to hear stories about how credit unions are, you know, nervous about doing something wrong and breaking the rules, or you know, breaking unspoken rules in a lot of instances. And you know, credit unions want to know the rules of the road, and they are generally very risk averse because of the approach that you're discussing right now. So, you know, we encourage the NCUA to seek more opportunities to encourage innovation, to even provide a sandbox of sorts so credit unions can seek out, you know, partnerships without being so worried about the supervisory implications of those innovative activities and products and services. You know, we applaud the NCUA's effort to set up this Office of FinTech and Access, and think that that could go a long way in helping to resolve some of these uncertainties, especially if that means that the NCUA is facilitating partnerships with fintechs. But we are constantly hearing about how credit unions feel like they are always trying to catch up to fintechs and never succeeding.
Gotcha. And I think I probably speak for the board. There shouldn't be such a thing as unspoken rules for our job. We're paid to publish rules. We vote on them 11 times a year. And if you're not breaking them, we shouldn't be saying anything about this. If something's truly terrible and somehow it doesn't break a rule, then that's on us. But yeah, the speed limit should be posted and you can do what you want around that. And it shouldn't be whatever the cop thinks it is on any given day. Yeah, but yeah, 100% on that. I will ask you guys to give us ideas on sandboxes, like literally what do we do? Do you need a letter, guidance, sandbox on what? A lot of these things are going to be experiments. We certainly don't want the blowback on us either, right? But yes, I just want to be clear that to spend all that much money that we're charging, and there are still people out there who aren't doing things they think are good because they think we'll be upset, even though it doesn't break a single word of a single one of our rules. That concludes my remarks. Back to the chairman.
Thank you so much, Vice Chairman Hauptman. Board Member Hood, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to also thank Mike, Anna, Lucy, and Carrie, not only for your presentations today, but for those very impactful written statements that you provided us. Those will all be a part of today's public record. So thank you. Few quick questions. First, Carrie, I wanted to just thank you for mentioning the advisory board. That was a matter that I did bring up in one or two of our recent board meetings. I do think it's critically important that we have an opportunity for our credit unions to express their concerns, to give us ideas. And in fact, I've even gone as far as to saying I'd like to see the advisory board focus on industry-specific topics such as fintech, cryptocurrency, use of blockchain. Those are the types of things. And then we can also have them focus on access. So delighted to know that you mentioned that. Another piece was the mission-driven fund. I too have met with folks from the FDIC, and just for the record, they are the convening party for that fund, but they did work with Truist and others to get it funded, and they do have a board seat. So we understand that NCUA from our general counsel, we, for opportunities that serve underserved, low-income communities, could have an opportunity to do a similar fund that we could convene and have it used for that purpose. So I do look forward to hearing more of your thoughts on how you would perceive a mission-driven fund for NCUA. There is a similar vehicle for the fintech investments. That is a fund that's now existing for $250 million, and it's helping foster partnerships with credit unions and fintechs. And I'm very bullish on fintechs because it can be an accelerant for our credit unions in better serving their members and meeting the needs of especially those younger members who don't probably want to go into a branch, but who want to use their iPhones or Androids to conduct business. So more to come on that, but I'm delighted to know that there is already a fund that exists for fintechs. And I'm very delighted to know if you're referencing of the PALS program. I still refer to FDIC data on unbanked and underbanked households that still stipulates that 40% of American households can obtain $400 in an emergency. And we also have 45 million folks who are characterized as unbanked and credit invisible. So using a PALS 3 would work. Question, rather than have PALS 1, 2, 3 and ad infinitum, what would you think about just redoing PALS and having one comprehensive PALS program so we get out of the differing versions?
Thank you, Board Member Hood, for that question. That is something that we'd have to pose to our membership, but if it provides more flexibility and allows credit unions to offer PALS programs economically and serve the individuals that need access to these short-term small dollar loans in a timely fashion and get them away from predatory payday lenders, I'd imagine that our members would be very supportive of a complete redo of the PALS program to just create one.
Well, it's an idea, so it's aspirational at this juncture, but would be delighted to follow up with you on it. And meanwhile, yes, I was very excited to work with our fellow board members to launch our newly or soon to be launched Office of Innovation and Access. I am looking at innovation in fintech, not just because it's the cool thing to do, but because it's a business imperative. If there's anything that our industry has learned during the COVID pandemic, it's those institutions that had fintech partners that were working in digital platforms, they were able to weather the storm. I believe that we're now going to look at platforms around technology, not as a luxury as we once did, but as a strategic and business imperative. With that being said, I think through the proper deployment of technology should come greater access for those marginalized, underserved communities, which is why we at NCUA were very emphatic about it being Office of Innovation and Access. To you, Lucy, I want to thank you for raising the comment about the need for greater awareness of the overhead transfer rate. Notably that even we probably all who touch that subject daily, we also are continuing to learn more about it each and every day. And with that being said, Lucy, would you prefer or would you recommend a webinar, or is it something we can address with frequently asked questions? what would be the appropriate thing? Because again, we are all close to it and we still question it. And again, as Eugene mentioned, the methodology has changed. What would be most appropriate to meet your need as articulated today?
Perhaps a webinar would help, and actually today's briefing, I think it's the most we've actually talked about the OTR mechanism itself. I do think even though the board is not obligated to put the OTR out for notice and comment for another, by now it would be approximately 2 years from now, it would be great to actually put that out for comment, notice and comment again next year, having heard the recommendations that we've outlined today. That would be fantastic and we're how many years in? 4 years in now. We understand a bit more about it, but there's still some stuff that we don't understand. So yeah, a combination of webinar and a new comment process would be great.
Well, that sounds great. So we will certainly take that back and review it. But again, thank you for that. And I think even adding a frequently asked questions document to that would go a long way as well. So thank you for that. And Lucy, before we adjourn, I just want to thank you for your leadership in the credit union industry. I too, like many of my board colleagues, believe in the power and value of the dual charter. When you look at that uptick of 5 million member owners of credit unions over the past year, many of them don't care whether they have a state charter or federally chartered. They just want to know, is my institution there for me to give me the financial services I need for my family? So thank you so much for working so collaboratively with our agency over the past few years. I was certainly pleased as chair to go to your conference where we signed that document of cooperation. And I continue to look for opportunities where we can work with our NASCAs and our SSAs. But meanwhile, thank you as you prepare for retirement, and you will get to watch, I guess, and go to our meetings online and see how we're implementing some of the things from today's meeting. So thank you for a job well done.
Thank you very much.
Oh, you're very welcome, Lucy. And Mike, I don't really have a direct question for you, but I want to just thank you for your leadership and candor for the years that you've been presenting at our budget briefings, but more importantly, recognizing that it comes not just from your expertise working for one of our trades, but from the direct experience that you get from being a part of a $5 billion with a B credit union. So it allows you to really see firsthand how our actions at the agency impact your credit union and its member owners. So with that, you all, I just want to thank the 4 of you today. It's been very robust, and thank you. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much, Board Member Hood. And I do want to add my fondest farewell to Lucy. I know we spoke during the FFIEC just about what an asset you have been on the FFIEC, certainly contributing to these budget hearings. I do hope, though, that you have better ways to spend your time than watching all of the NCUA board meetings going forward. With that, that is the end of our budget hearing today. Thank you all for coming and participating. There being no further business to come before the board today, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.